We'd like to call the regular meeting of City Council for Monday, October 7th, beautiful fall morning, to order. And our first order of business this morning is a real pleasure to introduce two of our Dawson Creek firefighters, Mark Sutton and Jason Carpenter, over here to receive their Fire Services Exemplary Service Medals. Well, if I can ask the guys to come up. Good morning, boys. Good morning, good morning. Good morning. So I'll read the certificate, and the Fire Services Exemplary Service Medal is awarded to Jason Carpenter in recognition of 20 years of loyal and exemplary service to public safety in Canada. Jason, thank you. There's the medal. Seems longer than that somehow. Fire Services Exemplary Service Medal is awarded to Mark Sutton in recognition of 20 years of loyal and exemplary service to public safety in Canada. Mark, thank you. Obviously, public safety is one of those core pieces for us in the city, and you guys and the work that all of you do at the city to for that exact message about public safety. And when we know we have an emergency, we have people at the other end of the line, serious, trained about responding to keep our community and residents safe, and we appreciate that service you've given to our community and region. Thank you. Good job.
Thanks.
Speech?
Speech. You
get your medal?
Yeah. Good job, guys.
2.2 this morning we have Jennifer Moore and Darren Snyder from Fort St. John's 2020 BC Winter Games in attendance to give our an overview of the Winter Games coming in February of 2020 to our neighbors. Welcome. Good morning. Thanks for being here this morning.
It was a lovely drive down.
It's a Winter Games day.
It certainly is.
You've got 4 minutes.
Someone actually asked the question recently if we were worried about not having snow. No, not worried.
All right, well, thank you for taking the time to allow us to come down and present to you. Okay.
I don't know how to run their clicker.
Is it?
There's a power button on the side, sorry.
Power on the side. Oh. On works. There we go.
So the purpose of the games is not just about the development of athletes and coaches. This is, certainly in preparation for those higher level sports, but it also promotes community interest and develops community capacity around community development. So with all of the volunteers and organizations that get involved.
Some of the sports, just a few slides: archery, rhythmic gymnastics, biathlon and cross-country skiing, wheelchair basketball, that's karate, diving.
So there's some legacy pieces that have happened around some of these sports, and despite being winter games, not all of the sports are outside, which is a good thing because I'm indoorsy. Otherwise I would have been out. But it's actually a pretty good balance between outdoor winter sports as well as some sports you wouldn't necessarily think of as winter sports. The games have been happening since 1978. 38 communities, over 350,000 participants, volunteers, folks involved. This is the 30th anniversary of the Winter Games, and I will explain the math to you. Originally, when they started the BC Games, they were doing them every year, and they quickly realized that it's because it's the largest multi-sport event that happens in the province that annually is perhaps a bit ambitious, so they moved to a biannual schedules.
Some of our alumni run the games, so everybody's heard of Bo Hedges in wheelchair basketball. and Denny Morrison in speed skating. So Denny has agreed and signed on to be our our athlete ambassador, so he'll be back for the games and giving keynote speeches and whatnot, so that's good.
He'll talk about what the games did for his career development so that he could launch to higher levels. So really, this is the highest level of competition that some of these athletes will ever hit. And for the ones who carry on, it really is a springboard for them.
So in February, so February 20th to 23rd is when the games are, and we're expecting about 1,800 in total participants. That includes coaches, athletes, and officials. The athletes will range in age from 9 years old up to about 16, 15, 16, so quite a young group really for the most part, average age of 14. In the city of Dawson Creek, we will be down here. We're using the Dawson Creek Ski Hill for the downhill alpine event. Dawson Creek Ski Hill, Bear Mountain Ski Hill for the alpine event during these games. There's going to be 128 skiers and 16 coaches, 6 officials using the facilities over the 3-day event. Bear Mountain Ski Hill themselves, along with their club here, are working hard to build their own volunteers, prepare the hill, and just have everything ready for the athletes to come up here.
So the athletes and the coaches will be traveling back to Fort St. John because there are evening events for the athletes outside of the competition, which is part of the games experience. The officials will be staying here in hotels in Dawson Creek.
So part of our presentation today is that we request that the skiers, I guess I'll rewind a little bit. All of the athletes are being housed and accommodated in school classrooms. It used to be in the olden days, you used to bill it when you'd go to these kind of games, but no more. Now they stay in accommodation sites, which is a 3/4 inch mat on the floor of the classroom. And so it's really comfortable that way. But most of the schools have taken their showers out. All the junior highs in Fort St. John, the girls' showers are still in, but none of the boys have showers. Most of the elementary schools have taken the showers right out. The kids just don't shower anymore. So that being said, we're housing...
Scary, right?
They don't shower at school. They take an axe shower, I guess, the little kids. But, so we're sort of scrambling for shower sites. We're busing kids around to the public facilities in Fort St. John, the Fort St. John pool or the North Peace Arena, to get them to shower and then take them back. So what we've asked, or we're here to ask Dawson Creek, is if we can use the showers at the Ken Borek Aquatic Center for these athletes coming from downhill skiing. So they'll be finishing up their event at about 3:30, something like that. And then dinner's at 7 at Fort St. John, so they would have an hour or two of time when they could use the showers if we receive permission to use them here in Dawson. Because we have a little bit of flexibility with the scheduling of the showers, that could be worked on as well, but yeah.
These alpine skiers probably have the roughest schedule of any of the athletes because they are traveling a distance away from Fort St. John. I think what I heard was the alarm goes off at 4:34, on the bus at 4:42. They're standing in the breakfast line before 5. And it's just because of, part of that is because of that travel window.
The second part of that is while the kids are at the Ken Borek swimming pool, is they're not gonna, if they're there for an hour or an hour and a half, we'd like them to be able to go swimming or use the hot tub for a half an hour while the other kids are showering or taking turns or however that works. So we've kind of requested that we could get access to the swimming pool for those 120 athletes for those evenings for that hour or two that they're there, if we can use the showers. Key timelines and events. So I'd just like to rewind this one. September 7th was our official kickoff to the games. So our volunteer registration opened on September 7th, so everybody can go online now and register to help out at Bear Mountain. And we have Brian here from the ski club from the mountain as well. He's our sport chair. Many of you maybe know Brian. And so he's spearheading that event for us. And yeah, so he'll be looking for volunteers as well. Torchlight ceremony is in conjunction with the Santa Claus Parade on December 7th. The Friends of the Game reception will be on February 19th. Friends of the Games is the game's fancy way of saying sponsorship and supporters. Opening ceremonies, provincial reception is February 20th. Civic luncheon, February 21st. Sports competitions will start on the 21st to 23rd. That's the normal competition. We do have ringettes starting on the 20th, which is the Thursday instead. Normally Thursday's a practice day, but because ringettes got a long tournament to do, the way their tournament is set up, they're going to start on the Thursday afternoon, play some games, go right through to the final game on Sunday is them as well at the Commerce One Center. So, closing ceremonies on February 23rd will be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we have a volunteer appreciation event after that for all of our volunteers.
So while the games are from the 20th to the 21st, because of our location in the province, normally what happens is Zone 8, which is the Northern 8, flies to where the games are and everyone else is bused. Everyone else is going to fly and Zone 8 will be bused. So there are 4 planes.
4 planes doing 14 trips.
Yeah, that are just back and forth. Delivering participants. Because of the logistics of that, they're actually arriving a day early. So they're starting to arrive on the 18th. So that means a whole extra round of meals. How do you keep teenagers occupied for a period of time? Because school is in session that day. So when school is out, then they have to flip these classrooms and, the first athletes or participants will be getting into their classrooms 7:30. But they could be arriving as early as 11 a.m. So what do you do with teenagers for a prolonged period of time other than have great Wi-Fi? So there's a whole bunch of other logistical challenges that the team is working on.
So in all, we're going to need approximately 1-to-1 is kind of what we figured, 2,000 volunteers, 1,800 to 2,000 volunteers. So that means that the ski hill down here, I'll be looking for probably about 130, 140 volunteers overall, everything from medical to hosts, to drivers, to
Security,
to everything that we will be looking for. So, volunteers are the driving force and heart and soul of the games. Everything, like I said, from meal preparation, transportation, hospitality, sports competitions. Enthusiasm and expertise of volunteers is what makes everything go around.
So we're trying something new, a pilot project for the first time. Normally what's happened with lunches is they're bagged lunches and volunteers deliver them to the sports site. This year we're trying to reduce the footprint and the waste that happens. So after the participants come through and get their breakfast, they'll have a reusable insulated lunch bag and they will pick their own lunch. So if they don't like ham sandwiches, they can pick a roast beef sandwich. If they don't like bananas, there's no point in putting a banana in their bag. They can pick an orange or an apple. And so they can pick the lunch that's going to work for them and hopefully reduce the stuff that lands in the garbage can.
And that's everything that we have.
I included a few slides here about the fog piece. So this is the games couldn't happen without the support of the community, and certainly the money that is received from the provincial government, the support from the city of Fort St. John, the school district, allow us to create sort of a bare bones games, but it's the community that allows us to really ramp things up and showcase what our community and our region is like. So we've been pretty successful in reaching out to the community and getting those donations. Certainly there will be some asks in the city of Dawson Creek as well because there's sports down here. And it's not confined just to Fort St. John and the one event down here. The figure skating is in Taylor. We've got cross-country skiing out at the Beaton Park. The biathlon is at the Rod and Gun Club out at Charlie Lake. So it really has taken our whole region to be able to showcase what we can do here in the north. And the impact of the games, they did an assessment in 2012 in Penticton and estimated that the impact was $1.6 million to the region. We really do want to showcase the region well. As we all know, because we live here, there's perhaps some misnomers about what life in the north is if you haven't been here, or so if we can really showcase what our communities are like, it may prompt some additional tourism dollars moving down the road.
So yeah, February 20th, 23rd. Just before anybody asks the question, hockey is not in the BC Winter Games, and that is not a picture of a hockey player. That's Ringette. And yeah, thank you very much for inviting us and having us speak.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. Council, questions? Councillor Wilbur?
Not particularly a question, but good job. Thanks for the presentation. You had mentioned the mats on the floor and something that triggered, I mean, it was done a little differently for the BC Northern Winter Games when those were still around. But the forestry has hundreds of these lovely tent cots, and they're for an individual person. And I don't know if you guys have approached them to see if those are available, but we did get them for both Northern BC Winter Games, and it was really unique because each athlete got their own cot. They were off the ground, it had a tent over it, and so they had privacy, they could store their stuff. So maybe something that you might want to contact the forestry about and ask them if those are still available.
We get a shipment in. BC Games owns all these mats, and so we got sea cans and sea cans full of them, 3,500 stacked like Jenga in a warehouse right now.
Yeah, they're lovely to put the mats inside the cot, but the cot gets them off the ground.
There are some cots available in the inventory that we get from BC Games because some of the athletes are not able to,
No.
you know, some of the wheelchair, there's a number of parasports or special Olympic sports, so they do accommodate that. But it's a small number of cots compared to the Jenga wall of
People, yeah, so anyways, it's if you want to check into it, it's there. I know they have them, and they're usually pretty generous.
Thanks.
Councillor Javetkov?
I'd like to thank you guys for coming down and giving us an overview. It's obviously a huge event for Fort St. John. A lot of organization, 2,000 volunteers is a lot of people. On behalf of the ski hill here, we're really pleased that we could participate. You know, it gives us an opportunity to showcase the hill, and I think hopefully develop more of an interest in competitive skiing. Brian Harmon is basically coordinating everything for our club, and we appreciate that. But it's a lot of work. I mean, we'll have you know, 120 or 130 skiers here, and that's a lot of work. So I can appreciate what you guys are going through in Fort St. John.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
We've seen some clubs or some interest in club development happen. There's a gentleman in Fort St. John that's trying to get a badminton club started. Biathlon. So clubs that are not necessarily, that don't exist yet, that could be a part of a legacy around the games, that, you know, there's something meaningful and long-term that comes out of it.
And that is the goal with Legacy, is to leave something in the community, right? So that you can build sports that maybe aren't here, or develop the sports that we have so they can race next year, right?
Yeah.
So, to do that next year.
So I'm going to stretch just a little bit of council's policy around delegations, and Brian is here with the delegation, so I'd like to, Brian, like to speak. And
just add to what they're saying about the development of the club. I've had lots of talks with BC Alpine, which is the provincial organization. It's kind of interesting that the gentleman is from BC Alpine, is from Dawson Creek, learned to ski here. But there is interest in developing a ski club here, as well as Bear Mountain becoming a training facility for BC Alpine.
awesome. Jennifer and Darren, thank you so much for being here this morning. We'll bring your request back under Mayor's business for the use of the pool and swim passes. So thank you again this morning. Best of luck, and it's going to be a great weekend for the region.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Drive safe.
He's in the passenger seat.
Item 2.3, we have Rob Ringma and Aaron Thompson, a familiar face, back in City Council this morning from BC Transit to give an update and an overview. And I'm going to ask Council's consideration. This is a hot topic, so we're going to stretch the time limit from 10 minutes to half an hour to give them ample time to be able to present. So, gentlemen, welcome. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Floor is yours.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, great to be back in Dawson. Brought some of that beautiful Victoria weather with me. So, great to be back. Where I'll start on myself, I'm Rob Ringman. I'm the Senior Manager of Government Relations for BC Transit. So I manage all of our government relations for Northern BC. That's basically any transit system that's north of 100 Mile House. So I get to travel up here and see all the great cities and all the great transit systems and all the great work that we're doing in partnership with our local communities. Aaron Thompson, who you all know from Dawson Creek, of course, he's now one of our transit planners at BC Transit, so he really works on some of the behind-scenes work when it comes to routing, scheduling of different transit systems. So when staff approached us, obviously wanted Aaron to get involved. Clearly comes with some unique perspective from a Dawson Creek perspective, so it's great to have him here. So really, how we got to where we are, staff from the City of Dawson Creek had mentioned to BC Transit about some fiscal shifts and constraints that the City of Dawson Creek was undertaking, and expressed a desire to look at transit service options that reduced our total budget envelope. So in response, we basically engaged staff, got a better idea of what the situation was, and worked on trying to put together different service options that would fit within some of the framework that was presented to us. So I thought what I'd start out with before we get to those options is just really giving a bit of a system overview so everybody understands what the system is and how it operates currently. So in Dawson Creek, we have a 3-route system, which is it's really a pulse-based system, which is quite efficient. All the different routes pulse out. They all meet at the Co-op Mall at about the same time, so people can facilitate transfers, and then they pulse back out into their respective areas. So what I would describe as a very efficient and good system that provides good coverage throughout the city. We talk a lot about service hours in terms of kind of looking at different systems. So that's over 9,000 annual service hours that we deliver, with service basically being currently 6 days a week, including statutory holidays. So that's Monday through Saturday, statutory holidays, but no service on Sundays. Currently, the conventional system operates for a total operating cost of about $1.16 million. But of course, through BC Transit cost sharing, the city's share of that is 53.31%, and BC Transit covers the rest at 46.69%. So the city's portion of those costs currently right now is about $626,000. Also to note, when the system, we obviously contract through Pacific Western Transportation for the actual operation of the service. When we RFP'd that system and awarded the contract to Pacific Western Transportation, it was in conjunction with the Fort St. John system, and what that gave us was just some fixed cost synergies, so where we could share management and supervisory costs with the city of Fort St. John. In terms of fleet, you have 4 buses in your fleet. Typically 3 will be on the road at peak times, with 1 as a spare. That spare bus is there for when we have to do scheduled maintenance, or if we have a breakdown, that we've got another bus there ready to pick up and ensure that we deliver service. Those buses are actually what we call our first generation of vicinity buses. So those are basically 2017 buses. They were brand new when they arrived here in Dawson Creek. And they're 27.5 foot buses, so they have a capacity of about 25 people. It's actually the smallest medium duty bus that we have in our fleet. So I think for the size of the system and the ridership that we're seeing, I think it's a good fit. So if we get a little bit more into some of the details just in terms of ridership and costs, ridership has grown last year. We see from 99,000 to 103,000. But if I went back 1 year to 2017-16, it was about 107,000. So what I would coin Dawson Creek's ridership is currently pretty flat ridership with kind of some seasonal, or not seasonal, but yearly kind of movements up and down. We've done, since staff kind of approached us with this, myself and Aaron have also done a little bit more diving into, okay, so who are those passengers? So really what we're seeing in some broad strokes is we're seeing school-age students during peak periods in the morning and afternoon. We're seeing what we call non-choice users. So that's seniors, that's low income, that's people with no vehicle or license. using the service during the day. And what really came through to me is, I don't know if you know about the BC Bus Pass program, but that's a program administered through the Ministry of Transportation. That's for people with disabilities or are on low income. And actually 38% of the ridership in Dawson Creek consists of people who utilize the BC Bus Pass program. In terms of monthly passes, about 30% of riders utilize monthly passes. And again, we can't dive down into the actual like specifics, but what I do know is the monthly bus pass for a student is $30 compared to an adult, which is $50. So we can assume that a fair portion of those monthly bus passes are student riders. So we're seeing bus passes again at about 30%. So pretty consistent between those two. And then we do see we did some ride checks, had the local operating company do some ride checks, and we do see some periodic travel throughout the day, what we would call kind of, commuter trips, leisure trips during the day. And the other key note, we saw ramp deployment was high. So every time one of our buses actually deploys the ramp, we actually can record that. We saw actually what I would call above average ramp deployment. So that's usually for people with mobility aids. So again, that kind of speaks again to that BC Bus Pass non-choice usership. So we didn't look, one thing I want to note is we didn't, as part of this review, we didn't look at fares and changing fares. I think last time I presented to council, I mentioned that your current adult fare is $1.75. Around the north, the standard, I would say average kind of fare is more around $2. And again, from a monthly, so right now, just if I walked through what your fares are, just for reference, your adult cash fare is $1.75. Your senior, with a monthly pass of $50. Your senior fare is, cash fare is $1.50 with a monthly cost of $40. And your student cash fare is, again, $1.50 with a monthly bus pass of $30. So we didn't really look at revenue potential based on fare increases, but just that is one other avenue that is at council's discretion. As you would know, all revenue comes back to the city of Dawson Creek to basically offset costs. So that is just a lever that we've kind of got in the repertoire that we could use. But really, we were directed to more look at service levels and cost reductions. So we did that through these options. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Aaron, and he'll walk you through the different options.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So we've prepared 5 preliminary service options just for discussion. So our first option would be maintaining the status quo, and that would maintain the existing service levels with no service changes. So that would see no changes to the system, the budget would remain the same, the average would remain the same, there would be no growth or shrinking. Service option number 2, that is reducing service frequency on Saturdays, discontinuing the weekday service between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. and reducing service frequency on the weekday middays. And through that option, you'd see about you'd see reduced hours and reduced costs. So we'd be looking about and along with that, probably about 22% reduction in ridership and a 16% reduction in revenue. Option 3 would just be reducing service frequency on all days. Again, saving more service hours, reducing costs further than option 2. But again, then you're could be expected reduction in ridership of about 38%, and about 33% reduction in revenue. Then option 4 is reducing service frequency on weekdays and discontinuing all Saturday service. And here again, all these options are progressing in reduced costs and reduced service hours. And here you'd be looking at about also reducing the ridership by about 46% and 43% of the revenue. Then finally, option 5 would actually discontinue the entirety of the Route 3 Central, discontinue all Saturday service on all routes, reduce the service hours to 17 hours daily split between a morning peak and an afternoon peak, creating a midday service gap, and removing one bus from the Dawson Creek fleet. This is the greatest reduction of all the options presented, and would see a estimated 53% reduction in ridership with about 50% reduction in revenue. Talking about some of the impacts to transit to our customers. So there are they would be expected with a reduction reduction in transit that transportation costs would increase for transit users, either by having to use alternate modes such as taxis or maybe acquiring vehicles for those who can. There'd also be reduced opportunities, and that's in both in terms of economic opportunities, people not being able to participate in jobs or be able to get to certain places at certain times, educational, which could be again related to school and school-aged children. Social, particularly among a lot of our non-choice riders, social trips are quite commonly heard from them. Recreational and medical as well. So all these types of trips could be lost with a reduction in service. Also with, say, option 5 there, which would reduce, we would discontinue Route 3, so there would be a reduced access to service with bus stops being further afield, meaning that people might have to travel further to access the service. And finally, that the non-choice users, the youth, the seniors, low-income people, people with disabilities, would be disproportionately affected by service reduction.
Thank you, Aaron. We'll bring up a table here in a couple slides that kind of reviews all those options, and I'll talk about a couple of the assumptions that were made in those. So if we kind of blasted through those, we'll come back to it and spend a little bit of time there. So just I wanted to outline again just some considerations that we need to look at when we're looking at these types of options. As I mentioned before, we do currently enjoy some contract synergies with our operating partner through the City of Fort St. John. So of course, we've got fixed costs that are always there. Your costs of management, supervisory, that are going to be there. And right now, we currently share those, so there's some savings that we're seeing right now. So the next point kind of goes hand in hand to that. When we reduce service hours, we don't necessarily reduce those fixed costs. So we can only do so much by taking hours out of the system to bring the cost down. At a certain point, we kind of bottom out with lease fee, vehicle fees, management fees, supervisory fees. So, the relationship's never one-to-one in terms of reducing service to reducing costs. And of course, as Aaron kind of outlined, one of the challenges when we're trying to project impacts in a transit system to reductions is that there's going to be a coinciding reduction in ridership that goes with a reduction in service hours. So of course that is going to negatively affect revenue. And revenue, of course, as I mentioned, goes directly back to the bottom line for the city. So it's something to be taken into consideration. And then total savings, again, we're putting out, we like to think of BC Transit, we have a really strong team and from finance to planning that can put some of these cost savings together. But again, what that final revenue, ridership, and actually the contract negotiations net out, we're dealing with a little bit of a plus and minus, but I think we've put some pretty good options out there for consideration. When we looked at revenue, we basically took a straight line on revenue. So they're based on a linear decrease. Again, actual results may vary there. What we also think is a consideration is that, as I mentioned in the earlier slides, because of the approximately that 35% of ridership that we're estimating is school-based students, that if reductions are inevitable, that we recommend not doing any changes until June of 2020. What that will allow us to do is get through the next full school season without any impact to school ridership. We would have 2 months of the summer to actively communicate what our new service levels would be for implementation. We would implement in June, but of course we'd have 2 months to speak about it and get people used to it before September, when school-age students would go back to school. We would definitely want to do a little bit of, I don't know if public engagement is the right word, I would just talk about public communications and make sure that that as we kind of go through the process that we're keeping the public is engaged and aware of what steps we're taking. And then just from a process perspective, any service change, so if we look at even a service expansion or a service optimization that we're doing here, it basically kicks in a whole BC Transit process of recreating new schedules, recreating the rider's guide, logistical changes, the contract negotiations that I talked about. So that typically for us is a 6-month process. We feel pretty confident that if we get direction from council on any changes, that we could hit that June 2020 timeline, considering all of our kind of internal processes. So here's the, so make sure I didn't miss anything. That's good. Here's, again, a summary of the options that were presented. When you see the estimated net municipal share of costs, so again, that is not the total cost of the system, that is the total cost that is the city's share of those costs. What is in that number is a projection on ridership and a projection on revenue. So we've actually taken the total cost, we've projected, we've taken your share of that cost, and then we've minused out projected revenue. So that's all been calculated in that, if I used option 5 as an example, getting the city's share of total cost down to $395,000. So from a high end of status quo, currently you're paying $626,000 for the service as is, down to option 5 of reducing it by over $230,000 to option 5 to $395,000 in local share. And I'll go back to that once we finish if council wants to look at that. Staff did ask us some questions on what they coined was on-demand service. We didn't include on-demand service as part of this review, and there's a couple of reasons why. On-demand is a bit of a buzzword out in the transit world right now. But there really is a bit of a lack of evidence that an on-demand service is going to provide the cost savings that we're looking for. We don't typically look at using on-demand as a fix for when we're looking at reducing costs in the service, mainly because, again, what you have when you do an on-demand system is you still need vehicles, you still need supervisory and management resources there. So again, your fixed costs stay fairly consistent. And then from an operations perspective, one of the big things I see here in Dawson Creek is we see these large loads at school times, and an on-demand system with smaller buses would have a very difficult time accommodating some of those peak capacity loads. Lastly, one of the other big things that was expressed to us from staff is that council was looking for some options on a fairly tight time frame. If we were to look at on-demand service, it would involve an entire review with planning, getting really into what type of service that would look like, and lots of internal work. And then if the result was to procure new buses, BC Transit has an 18 to 24 month procurement process, so we'd be looking at least 18 to 24 months to be able to implement something. So we're not saying we couldn't do further work on an on-demand service. What we're basically saying is, based on the timelines that we're given, that this isn't really an option. But again, if council thought it through and wanted to make any changes now and still have BC Transit look at other alternative service provision options, that's something we could look at. We're currently doing some test, kind of dipping our toe in the water from a on-demand perspective and trying to get basically some results out of that we can use for knowledge moving forward. So that brings into our presentation. I'm sure there's one or two questions. So I'll, with Mayor's permission, I'll open up to the floor.
Thank you, Rob. Mayor, questions for Council? Councilor Alexa?
All right, well, thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for your presentation. Obviously, we're looking at all aspects of our budget. Transit is one of them. A couple of quick ones. Under your considerations, you talked about total savings still subject to final contract negotiations. Can you give me a ballpark? Are we within 2% with the numbers you put forward, 3%, 20%? Is there...
Yeah, I wouldn't want to speak for the contract management team or finance, but what I would say is, we have a pretty good understanding of what our operating costs are going to be in a certain market. So our finance team does a pretty good job of looking at what our kind of operating cost per hour is. We look at we look at multiple different things. When we went through this scenario, again, when you reduce the hours, it's pretty easy, if you know what your operating cost per hour is, to get to that number. It was the fixed cost line that we really, actually the first, and I apologize to staff, but in one of the first reports I had them, I actually had lower costs from an estimated net municipal share of costs. But after revisiting with finance and really going through the nitty gritty of the fixed cost line, we felt 395 was where we netted out. So I can't give you a 2% to 5%, but I can say, Councillor, that I think we're within probably that 5% zone.
Okay. And I'll just a comment more than a question. The issue we're looking at is not a result of poor service by any means by BC Transit. This is a financial issue we're looking at as a council, and it has been challenged for a couple of decades. I mean, I can remember the discussion going back. A community like ours, many times, as a matter of fact, most times you go by and if you see 2 people on our bus, we're lucky. So a lot of people are questioning the value. I think we put in, and correct me if I'm wrong, for every individual that gets on that bus, the city taxpayer subsidizes that ride by about $7. And I'll be in the ballpark. I think I might be low there even. So it's a challenge for us to find the right mix of what we have to get to have a system that's going to provide that service. But where we're at today, I think it would be probably fair to say from my perspective, we're not there. We can't continue down this path of the service we have today under an affordability context. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I think, staff was very helpful in outlining some of those challenges. And I think, what we tried to do here through our different options is really look at what that core service that is, that ridership that is, at kind of the core of your current service, and try to, I'll use the word, maintain that as best we can while looking for optimization options in other areas. And the only other comment I make on that, when we talk about option 5 and discontinuing Route 3, I imagine what Aaron might want to speak to this, but we would probably look at Route 1 and 2 and look at some slight tweaks to Route 1 and 2 as part of that, just because there are a couple areas along Route 3 where we do see quite a few passengers alighting the bus. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that. But.
Yeah, so we probably would look at changing the routes a little bit, being kind of time agnostic with our run times. So we have kind of done some really preliminary look on that, and we thought we have identified a few minor shifts that could probably be done if option 5 was picked, just to maintain some of that previous area that was covered by Route 3.
So I guess the short answer is, based on recommendation from council, we'll look to try with the budget framework that we have and kind of the base idea of the options. We'll look to make sure that the system's as maximized as we can for the citizens of the city.
All right. And one closing comment. Certainly you talked about the potential impact on seniors, for example, low income. Certainly our goal is to try and find a method to make sure we can maintain a service level that will accommodate that. The real challenge is the school children riding the buses. Anybody historically would know they used to ride a school bus in town. There's people here that are far more versed in that than I, and over the years the city managed to inherit that cost and transport children from one edge of town to the other. That's going to be a difficult thing for parents, but certainly we don't want to be in a position where this catches people off guard. That is going to be an issue out there, and if the school district is going to look at other options, they would have to do that, but I think it's beyond the scope of the transit system for the city of Dawson Creek to be held responsible for that. So.
Councillor Javeco?
So speaking about the transferring the students, if you excluded the students from the picture, what would be roughly the peak capacity for ridership? Like, I'm just thinking, if you had an on-demand service, excluding the students, what would be the peak capacity for, at any point where you had to provide an on-demand service?
Yeah, I think I'll let Aaron chime in after I'm done if he has any other thoughts, but what we definitely see is we use the term crush load, so we're seeing high loads during the morning and afternoon times right around the school periods. We are not seeing capacity issues in between. So that's the one point I can definitively tell you is that, we've even had some public feedback about those peak times where either children are having challenges getting onto buses, or people, other passengers can't get on the bus because the buses are full with school-age students. But your question on on-demand, again, I can't really definitively say what our peak would be. If you go to an on-demand service, typically on-demand is either curb to curb or door to curb, or so it's a more customized service. You could see ridership go up because now all of a sudden it's technically more convenient for me to ride transit when it's going to come right outside my door. So it's kind of why I put that one slide up there, Councillor. It's one of those things where we don't know until we really would dive into that. What we do know is right now, if you still provided school age service, an on-demand service would likely not have the capacity to handle that.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. So we appreciate you obviously coming in this morning and giving us an update on this. It's obviously a big topic for council and our community, and I think your slide in consideration to me is it's ridership. We just have a low ridership use overall of our system that's expensive in the overall context of impacts on our budget, and if we had the ridership, the revenue would be corresponding right along with it. So it's that ridership to me is how do we, and we've juggled schedule, we've juggled routes, we've juggled things, try to manage a system, and to me, if we juggle it more and reduce ridership by 50%, that's a low number in terms of folks riding our transit. So it's a major topic of conversation for us. We appreciate you guys coming in and doing the work on it, and look forward to kind of working our way through this in the coming months with you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we move now into item 3, new councillor business. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Worship. So a couple things this morning. First, I just wanted to kind of register my disappointment with our counterparts in the provincial government, specifically the Ministry of Agriculture and the Agricultural Land Commission, who was in Dawson Creek last Wednesday holding a feedback and engagement session for residents with respect to recent changes made to the ALR. The only way I know about that is because I showed up at the event center dropping off a banner for my day job as the session was taking place. I think there were maybe 3 people there who weren't employed by the Ministry of Agriculture representing the Agricultural Land Commission. They did not advise the City of Dawson Creek. There was no one there from the PRRD, and upon further follow-up, they were not advised of it. There were no local reps from the BC Grain Growers Association, no one there representing cattle producers as far as I could tell. And upon further research, the only publication I found of it in the media was posted at 9:39 a.m. the morning of on energeticcity.ca, and the session began at 10 a.m. So I'm not sure what happened there. If there was some oversight, you'd think coming out of the debacle that was the Caribou feedback sessions that they'd talk amongst themselves and figure out how to not have this thing happen. But obviously agriculture and land use being a very important part of our region and very near and dear to many residents who earn their living off the land, seems like a missed opportunity. I don't know if it warrants anything so dramatic as a formal letter, but I'm happy to leave it at that. But just disappointing to see, because it is something that's very important to people here. Second thing, I was, once again, through my capacity in my day job, invited to a meeting for the local Legion on Saturday. But while there, as often happens, I was given some information in my capacity as a councillor as well. The local Legion advised that as they were their venue for the Remembrance Day ceremony this year, they've hit a speed bump, namely that Unchaga Hall is having the chairs changed out, and all the chairs are pulled out of there. But as we here at council know, when it comes to capital projects, sometimes schedules don't work out the way you'd like, and new chairs won't be arriving until much later in the month, which will mean that Uchaga Hall is not going to be available for our local Remembrance Day ceremony. They have sourced out another venue. The only other venue in town capable of accommodating the service is Co-op Mercer Hall. Previously, they'd been getting Uchaga Hall for free. Co-op Mercer Hall, to set it up and man it for that event, comes with some fixed costs that, in speaking with representatives at the event center, they tried to make it as inexpensive as possible, but it still comes with a price tag when you look at setup, tear down, production, video, audio, things of that nature, and then insurance. I forwarded the quote, Judy Kucherik, I asked her for it and she sent it to me, so I forwarded it to Duncan, but it comes with price tag somewhere probably between $2,000 and $3,000 all in. So they didn't budget for that, obviously, given that they get Uchaga Hall at no cost every year. So it's my hope, if we can bring it back under mayor's business, that we can look at funds remaining in the sponsorship and donation budget, which I think we've still got some, to help them out this year. And then for future years, hopefully it won't be a problem once the chairs are installed in Uchaga.
So you're making a motion to, for council to consider this, so you need to make a motion, we'll get a second.
Okay, yeah, I'll make that motion.
Seconded, Councillor Kemp. Discussion? No. Councillor Lexstrom?
So, a great idea. I mean, we will do what we can to support our veterans and do that, but would it not be worthwhile us pursuing maybe a partnership with Spectra themselves? They may want to contribute half of this and the city contribute half, I mean, as a show of community?
So, sorry, I can kind
Go
of
ahead.
speak a little bit to that. So if Duncan can send you guys the quote, basically they've done as much as they can at cost, essentially. They're just trying to cover their hard cost. I do know we perhaps in our contract with Spectra get a couple comped uses of the facility per year. I'm not sure. Usually we use at least one of them for a public budget, public budget consultation. So I'm not sure if that's an option as opposed to paying directly, but I'm sure Spectra would, to the best of my knowledge, they've tried to make it as inexpensive as possible. Those are just hard costs they have to cover as far as staff hours go. So either way, I mean, it kind of turns out being a subsidy by the city no matter what.
Duncan?
So through your worship, through the agreement, we are able to waive 2 events a year, but we still pay out-of-pocket expenses. So essentially, you're waiving the rental itself. Typically, GRAD has been one of those events that council has approved. And I'd have to look into the budget meeting to see if that's the second event, but we do have that ability to waive 2. If they've already essentially taken away the rental, I don't know that it would be any better of a price.
Councillor Parslow?
So when the city, let's say, holds a public meeting at this hall, does that cost us $5,000 a pop or so?
Through your
Just
worship, I'd have to.
extrapolating.
Sorry.
I mean, do we pay for all our, let's say we have a budget consultation in this facility, we're paying an amount larger than that?
Duncan?
So through your worship, I'd have to go back and look. We have the ability to waive 2 events similar to the Calvin Crook Center, similar to most of our other agreements where council can waive those 2 events. We pay out-of-pocket expenses. As far as the budget, I'd have to go back and take a look what we did last year. I'm not sure.
So we'll, further discussion on the motion to bring it back under mayor's business. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Anything further, Councillor?
That's it for me, sir.
Councillor Lexstrom?
A question through to Councillor Earl. You talked about the ALR. I do think it's worth a letter requesting that they reconsider and maybe host another meeting up here so that people that are interested could come. I don't want them going back and saying how wonderful people think the ALR is operating, because I just don't think that's the case and hasn't been for some time. So I'm going to give them the benefit. This was an oversight, a very significant one on their part. But when local governments are not notified of this, when our community and rural agricultural community is not notified. Also, they would have to know that probably their timing couldn't be worse, right in the middle of harvest, typical. It would seem to me that if this is the people looking at our ag sector and not understanding that we're in the fields at this time of year, I'm have even greater concerns. But a follow-up letter requesting that they do this properly, I think would be in order. And if that has to come under mayor's business, your worship, that would be fine.
So I had intended to write a letter because I got the notice, but if you guys want to direct that, bring it back under mayor's business, I'm good with that. So, motion?
I'll make the motion.
Move. Councillor Parslow, seconded Councillor Lexstrom. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Good work, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Business, further? Councillor Wilbur?
I know a few of us have attended UBCM, but I just wanted to update that I did attend the MIABC AGM. There were several resolutions that were passed that make additions to the insurance policy and some changes. So I did electronically forward that to staff, mayor and council, as well as provided Brenda with the hard copy this morning. So nothing alarming in there. I know drones were added to the policy, so I thought that was an interesting aspect. So yeah, so that's in Brenda's capable hands. The other thing is I did attend the Doig River Urban Land Reserve Forum in Fort St. John, and I found that very informative. I'm glad I attended, and it's interesting what's possible if you work together. So I'm interested to see what transpires out of all of that. As well as I attended the ICS and EOC training at the hospital. So that's Incident Command Center and then the Emergency Operations Center. So that too is very interesting. Learned a lot of things, and I have to say, kudos to our staff and our physicians and nurses and just the staff at the hospital, and they've got it together, and they've seen where there were some loopholes, and I'll tell you, before the next day they had them buttoned up, and we're moving forward. So that was, I really appreciated attending that. As well, I did attend the opening of the Enbridge office in Fort St. John, but I just wanted to be clear that I attended as the president of the South Peace Health Services Society and not as a city councillor, because I was asked. So no, I did not attend as my role here. It was a personal invitation in another role that I have. So yeah, oh, and I did attend also the powwow exhibit at the art gallery in the opening, and I highly recommend that everybody go check out that exhibit. It's a wonderful exhibit, and it is great to see so many local people represented within that show. And I do believe the art classes this week, all of their techniques and stuff will be around that exhibit that's there for the next month.
Thank you, Councillor.
Busy.
Thank you. For the Councillor Business, anybody? Thank you. So we'll move to minutes. 4.1, we have the minutes of our regular meeting of council of September 9th for adoption. Move, Councillor Parslow, second. Councillor Wilbur, any errors or omissions in those minutes? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. And the minutes of our special meeting of October 1st for adoption. Councillor Wilbur, second. Councillor Earl, any errors or omissions in those minutes? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Any business arising out of the minutes? Councillor Lexstrom?
Just under the first set of minutes, your worship, we talked about the DVP, DVP 19, which is dealing with Crescent View. Do we have any updates on the storm water drainage issue up there? Has there been any follow-up with the developer on that? Have we reached an agreement on what's necessary for the first 21 lots, I believe?
So through your worship, by May.
Yep, go ahead, sorry.
So development variance permit, you're
I'm just
talking
pulling
North
up the
17th.
minutes, so-
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, with the Roberson development.
Yes.
Okay, so Kevin, do you have any additional information?
Through your worship, we reached out to the consultant engineer seeking some clarification. I have not heard back.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, do we have a signed DVP at this time? No, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Any other business arising out of the minutes? Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
The second set of minutes, your worship, 732, the motion be amended to affirm the current practice regarding hours for liquor sales. So we reaffirmed that we were going to stick with what we had at the present time. There was a comment in that meeting made that you may be going to engage downtown businesses. Did you have?
I haven't had a chance
Okay,
to,
so we're gonna do
follow
that.
that.
As it stands, just so I understand, we're gonna keep the existing policy as it states. If there's a wish of other merchants, through that discussion, we would
Yeah, I'll bring that back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Councillor Parslow, did you, sorry? Correspondence, 6.1, we have a letter from Ben and Linda Sonder from Dawson Creek regarding an offer to purchase. Councillor Parslow?
I'd like to move that we consider this matter under item 7.1 as reference is made to that in that part of the agenda.
Thank you. Second?
Receive it and act on it under 7.1.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Wilbur. Discussion? Duncan?
Through your worship, as you can see, there's a bit of a history regarding this walkway. We do have a walkway policy. As we get into that discussion, I guess under 7.1, I can speak to that policy and how that would fit within this particular request.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Javetkov?
So, I didn't hear all of the motion there.
So-
What is the intent?
We're going to deal with it under 7.1, where we deal with the report from administration on the Chamberlain Park, because there's also a letter from the Saunders in there on the
But
purchase of that property.
this is separate. This is the walkway. The Chamberlain issue is the improvements.
Yeah. That's Councillor Parslow?
Yes, but the action suggested by administration is incorporated in 7.1, this walkway. So, why?
So we'll deal with it as
The CEO is looking puzzled.
as one discussion under one component, because Saunders have also written a letter for their purchase of their property under that consideration of the Chamberlain Park report. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 6.2, we have a letter from Elizabeth Hunt, President of the Legion Branch 141, with a request to display paintings. Councillor Lexton?
Your worship, at this time, I would move a motion that we allow the artwork of Sam Side to be put on permanent display at the Dawson Creek Airport as requested by the Legion.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Parslow. Discussion? Councillor Lexton?
I think certainly many longtime residents will have known Sam Side, a gentleman that helped build this community in this region, served on this council. Air was his passion for many years. I think it's very appropriate that not only do we display this, but as we do it, we look at some form of recognition or plaque to be displayed with these at the same time, if that would be accepted in the motion I put forward.
Thank you. Further discussion? For all, and as Blair's indicated, for all of us who grew up here over the years and knew Sam as this really a great community guy and business guy and Rotarian and very involved in the community, I think it's very appropriate that we take the opportunity to look back and recognize some of those real builders in our community, and Sam was one of them. Thank you. Further discussion? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 6.3, we have a letter from Tyra Henderson, Corporate Officer from the Peace River Regional District regarding a request to participate in the Regional Housing Needs Report. Councillor Parslow?
I'd like to move that we accept this invitation to take part in this Regional Housing Needs Report project.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Lexton, discussion?
I note that they applied for a grant to support the funding of this, so this intention of the regional district is subject to them getting a grant.
Councillor Lexton?
It's just following through and supporting the motion that's before us. You know, we often seem to look at housing needs in isolation. The city of Dawson Creek may look at it, the district of Chetwynd individually, our rural areas. So to see this being coordinated, I'm hopeful that the grants come through and we look at it in a more inclusive manner in the sense of a region, if it's possible. If not, we would have to look at, we do know in the city of Dawson Creek, for example, there's a great need. We've talked about it preliminarily with our ability to supply land and different issues. But this would be, I think, taking it to the next step to see not only here's the needs of the actual city, but our surrounding area as well and other communities.
So, and I'm going to speak to it as well because I want to add some kind of some additional. This report, this analysis, this study was to have taken place last year, and we did give that direction to the RD because they were going to do a regional housing study and analysis of housing needs for the region, both North Peace, South Peace. And that got delayed for some reason, and now that the province have implemented this requirement to do the study, we're going to partner here in this motion with the RD to do that work. I'm going to bring forward another piece to this. Is I think we absolutely, this motion will give us the opportunity to participate in that housing needs assessment report, but I'd also like to suggest that we need to partner in there and get the gap analysis study done on this overall social housing that we require, specifically maybe for our region as it relates to social, transitional, and things like that in conjunction with the seniors. So I'm going to bring that back as a separate motion as a recommendation for a resolution. But this gives us the ability then to get this housing needs assessment report done as required now under the Government Act. I was going to speak to it at our meeting on Monday at the UBCM with Minister Robinson of Housing, and I did speak to her specifically and exactly about that. And we've got the information, and she's absolutely focused on we can get the grant money is available up till November, and so the RD are going forward with that. I think it's appropriate we partner with them, get involved in that, and get the report done that we need for the city's housing needs for that seniors component, and then partner in behind that. So I'm completely on side with this. Councillor Wilbur?
It's a great opportunity. Just a question through you to staff. Do we need to have the wording in there that we're agreeing that they apply for, receive, and manage the grant? So that'll just be in the wording. We don't need to actually have it in our motion. Okay,
So-
thank you.
So through your worship, if approved, we'll ensure that they get the language they need.
Perfect.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Duncan?
So through your worship, maybe I'll just add a little bit on to the point that you made. This is relatively new. It's a provincial requirement. There's a grant available. Most of the communities are going through this for the first time. We're not really certain what exactly this report is going to look like when we get it back. So if there is a specific area that you want some information in, as mentioned, senior transitional housing, it wouldn't hurt to have that separate motion to be very specific so that at the end of the day, we don't have this conversation again a year from now.
Yeah. And in that context, we did, and I don't know if this council has agreed, but certainly in the previous term, we dedicated that land up at the old Kiwanis Performing Arts Center as a property that would be, we would like to see developed for that social housing, seniors housing, or whatever it may be. And so this really fits into that for us as one piece of moving it forward. And then council will get that information, and then we'll make the decision then in terms of, is that what we want to see happen, how, and what the needs are in that. So. Duncan, anything further?
No, that's
good. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. The second resolution I'd like to add in there, so we are very specific about it, is that in addition to that legislated information required, that the city's report will also include a gap analysis on the social housing needs within the city of Dawson Creek. Because I'm worried that that might get missed. Yeah. So I need a second. Councillor Parsel. Discussion. Councillor Lexman.
Just a quick question, Your Worship. Now, you say the city of Dawson Creek that needs, will that fit into the request that has come from the RD, or are we talking a separate one? Or should we broaden it to say, not just the city of Dawson Creek, but the region? We want that part of this study.
So to me, I think, honestly, I want to make sure, I know the regional district are going to take this on, that part of that work that we have to do under the new legislation. And because they're going to do the analysis, I want to make sure that we get in there and identify some of the specific needs for our community and they can incorporate it as part of that analysis that they're going to do within there. And it may be that we may end up then saying, as they do the procurement of it, if they come back and say, look, in order for you guys to do this off the side, it may cost you some money to do that, they'll bring that back to us as part of that work that they're going to do.
All right. No, it's fine.
I just, like I said, I'm worried that we don't specifically identify that, and that gap analysis may not include that, and we're seeing more and more about tents popping up in our parks and the homelessness, and I just want to make sure we get some of that data in there to identify what the needs are for the future, and we don't want to be going back and doing another bit of analysis for the future if it isn't incorporated in this report. That's just my thoughts. Discussion, questions? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. 6.4, we have a letter from Laura Dick, Port Moody resident. Councillor Lexton.
Your Worship, I'll move for discussion, a quick discussion on this.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Wilbur. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship. Now, this obviously a very serious letter talking about people if they are charged. It's interesting, not convicted yet, about having counts, people that are in elected office, dealt with and not be able to hold office. The way this has been written, and I know the UBCM has dealt with it before, I'm somewhat supportive of the issue. We live in a society where you're innocent until proven guilty. Certainly conviction is going to be a key issue for me in any support of this. But also, when you look at the resolutions that were passed and adopted by the UBCM, I believe it was last year, or some years ago, they talk about it, except for not including convictions related to non-violent acts of civil disobedience until the expiration of the time. And it goes. So what they're saying is we'll pick and choose which laws we want to say that an elected official can't hold office under, but you go protest and disrupt society and get convicted and you're okay. I fundamentally don't agree with that at all. That was why I wanted to move for discussion.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Javetkov?
I'll make a motion that we receive for information.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Earl? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 6.5, we have a letter from Chad Anderson, Board Chair, School District 59, regarding some concerns about the temporary dog park. Councillor Kemp?
Can I move for discussion?
Yes. Second? Councillor Earl? All in favor? Opposed? Carried? Go ahead.
I just wanted to talk about this. I've actually attended lots of the Dog Park Society meetings, and I just wanted to note that the date of the letter, the park actually didn't open until after that letter was sent. They had their grand opening only about 2 weeks ago. So during that time, they were kind of down there still kind of cleaning up and stuff, but the park actually didn't officially open until 2 weeks ago. So they have put signs on the fence, and they are doing things on there now for the last 2 weeks, have been kind of monitoring the area. It is posted on there that on the rules and stuff, and on there it says no dogs should enter unless they're at the park unless they're on leash, and so they have to be on leash entering and exiting the park, and dogs must be under control of the handler and in the view of their handler at all times. And it also says dogs on leash must stay at least 30 feet 10 meters away from the playground area. So the dog park is quite a distance away from the playground area, and I just wanted to remind people that it is a temporary thing, and I know the Dog Park Society is trying to work very closely with the school district. They've tried to contact and stuff, and they really want to work with them to ensure that this works for everyone, because the safety is definitely a concern of the children, right? Making it work for both parties.
Thank you. Councillor Earl?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think what may have happened here is, I don't know, a failure in communication or what have you, but I think when council gave the Dog Park Society the 1-year temporary use or temporary go-ahead, and it was on social media and showed up in the paper and what have you, that we okayed a dog park, I think a lot of people just started taking their dogs there. Prior to the society having the baffle gates up and the signage up and having the other processes in place. So I'd have to look at the wording of the resolution we passed, or the motion, but I think some of the concerns expressed in this letter reflect prior to the opening of the dog park, simply because people heard there was a dog park and they just started going there with their dogs outside of maybe what we intended and what was communicated. There might have been a little difference there. So,
Councillor Wilbur?
I just want to add that actually People have been taking their dogs out all over the community, to the schools, to the parks, taking them off the leash, letting them do their job and not picking it up. I think this was just an opportunity to say, look, these guys are organized and they didn't move fast enough. You know, I'm glad they're working with the school board, but to be honest, I constantly see people around our community with their animals not on a leash and letting them do their business in parks and school grounds. So the reality is people need to be smarter. We have a facility for them to go to, follow the rules, and you know, work with your neighbors. But that area in particular, and I did hear from residents down there before we passed it, that people were already down there doing that. So, and it's not unusual to find the dog's business in a school ground that hasn't been picked up, because it's actually quite common. So really, I think the neighborhood and the community as a whole, if you have a pet, you need to be responsible and you need to pick up what they leave behind before you leave the trails and the parks.
Councillor Lexstrom and Councillor Javetka.
I was just going to suggest maybe we have administration follow through with the author of the letter, encouraging them to meet with the Dog Park Society, and then we monitor this together over the next, 60 days and see how things are progressing. It might help all the parties, including council, the school district, and the Dog Park Society. So I throw that out as a recommendation.
Sure. And perhaps Councillor Kempf, if you're interested to join in on that.
Most definitely.
Sure. Duncan?
So to your worship, if I may, Ross has done some follow-up with the group. I'm not sure with the school district, although I know there were some emails back and forth before this letter came forward, so maybe an update, Ross?
Yes, thank you, through your worship. Yeah, we've worked with got some correspondence from the school district. We've worked closely with the Dog Park Society. And I believe that the society itself has now met the obligations as specified in the agreement we have with them. Again, I think the timing was the big thing. The signage is up. There's a bear-proof garbage can on site now. There's doggy dew dispenser bags there in the stand. So I think, again, it was the timing. At this point in time, would encourage that further communication, and happy to participate in that as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Javetka?
So I was going to suggest we refer the letter to the society, because they did commit to enforcing their, and I think, the letter's dated September 20th, so it's, probably a lot of things have happened since then. But I think we should, this comes from the chair of the school board. I think it's, we should be responding to him, explaining exactly what's been going on, and, so that we're, responding to the board.
Sure. So you want to make that by way of a motion?
That as a motion.
That we respond to the chair, and we'll draft a letter outlining what the society is doing and what we are doing, and follow up with that. Thank you. Second, Councillor Earl. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Hey, stop using your mouth.
Oh, stop.
She's harassing me.
So we're going to get into 7-1 reports. Are you okay to go for a bit, or do you want to have a 5-minute? We'll recess for 5 minutes.
I need
and then-
recess now.
Yeah. Then Councillor Carswell can get himself back in order, and we're going to now move on to item 7 of the agenda, reports. 7.1, we have report 19148 from the corporate officer regarding our Chamberlain Park and the neighborhood responses, and so we can have a motion to receive for discussion. Councillor Wilbur, second. Councillor Lexstrom, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Duncan, can you walk us through?
Yes, so through your worship, Chamberlain Park, and this is to deal with some encroachments behind this. There's some properties, approximately 30 properties, and this has been ongoing, as council is aware, for council for the last 2 years, and for these residents, some of this infrastructure has been there for 20 plus years as well. So you have the recommendation in front of you, and I thought what I would do is maybe walk council kind of through that recommendation and where that piece comes from. So Council has met with the public, and I don't think we have the timeline attached here, but we have provided a timeline previously. We've met with the residents in this neighborhood on multiple occasions. The last discussion we had with these residents looked at the purchase of the property, and Council's direction was essentially to go out and see what that looks like. So we received a lot of comments, and Brenda will jump in here and correct me in a couple places, I'm sure. But we received a lot of comments. Approximately 20 of the 30, or I think it was 18 of 28, or somewhere around there anyway, are interested in purchasing the property. However, they wanted some further discussion on what that property line looks like. We did our best guess in trying to draw a consistent property line and try to capture some of the infrastructure, but in follow-up with some of the residents, they don't know that is required, all of that. So there's some moving pieces here, but essentially what staff is recommending is that the sale or that the land be sold for interested parties, and the other residents that aren't interested in purchasing the land remove their infrastructure. And essentially we've mapped out how that would take place, and essentially it takes place using a land agent. There's approximately 30 properties, and there would be some work on each individual property that would have to take place. Being in the north and being in the economy that we're in, there are agents that do this type of work that we would recommend hiring. We also recommend that we approach this on the assessed value, and that there is a deposit to ensure that any time spent on this, if it does not result in a sale, that there is some funding available for that. As you're aware, anybody who doesn't purchase and removes their infrastructure from the land, all of the costs to date would now be absorbed essentially by the residents that want to purchase still. So because this is on city land, it's not private property, there is no ability to place those costs on property taxes or any of those metrics. So essentially, whatever the cost is divided by the number of properties that want to purchase the space behind their property. So we talk about a deposit, we talk about sharing costs. Some of those costs would apply to the OCP and the rezoning, the land agent fees, the actual cost moving forward, which would be surveying and some of those other components, and some of the previous costs. Any individual property that incurs additional costs for additional negotiations or other reasons would pay those individual costs, but as a whole, we're recommending we try to essentially break those costs out among all of the properties that would like to purchase. So it's been a big discussion to date. We've done an incredible amount of work, and Brenda and Kevin and planning and Cindy, have been working on this file for close to 2 years now, and now we have a recommendation in front of council of a number of landowners that would like to purchase this property.
Thank you, Duncan. Councillor Wilbur?
Yes, and yes, thank you to all of staff who've been working on this. It's been quite the journey. My question through you, Your Worship, to staff is, I do note in particular there's one resident who actually hasn't even owned the property for a year yet. They're not interested in buying. So then who takes on the cost of removing the tree house and the shed that's on that encroachment property? Is it going to be through the sale? And then my other question is, yes, there are people who have said they'd purchase it, but yet it's, they've suggested $1, they've suggested, so what happens if they decide, if they're not going to get it for what they think they should, they decide not to sell it? Now I see fences, sheds, trailers, garden boxes, multiple of things. So are the rest of the property owners purchasing also taking on then the cost of removing all of that on the encroachments?
Duncan?
So through your worship, we have not built into the cost for the purchasers that cost to remove the infrastructure that's abandoned, for lack of a better word. Because it's not on private property, we're unable to place those charges on taxes. There are other means to pursue that, but I don't know how successful we would be, and I don't know what that cost looks like just yet.
Perfect. Thank you.
Duncan?
And through your worship, I didn't address the walkway piece that was deferred or tabled from correspondence. So the walkway, essentially, there is a bit of a story behind that walkway. However, really, council's decision in this aspect, if you decided to return this back to park, council may wish to have access through that crescent. Now, having said that, there is still going to be some park area behind these properties, and as we move through the process, I expect that these property lines will reduce somewhat, and the sale will include less property, and you may wish to provide some access through that particular neighborhood. Now, on the flip side of that, there hasn't been access for 30 years either, so there's both sides of the coin on that discussion. The walkway policy itself actually outlines that both adjacent owners have the opportunity to purchase that property, and I don't know, this recommendation, or sorry, this request is to purchase the entire walkway. If we were following our policy, we would offer it to both, and they would both split that walkway.
And we have a letter from the owners at the time from their neighbors who said they weren't interested in it, right?
Correct, and I can't confirm if those are still the same neighbors or if it's something different.
So we would follow through on that as a policy if council decides to move forward with that.
Yeah, so, sorry, through your worship, if you were to approve that request, you would be waiving your policy, is what I was trying to point out.
Good. Councillor Parslow.
Well, thank you for Duncan mentioning that. I suggested we consider this whole property issue and this Pinecrest Lane as part of our discussions. And I just want to, if some of you missed it, under the side heading Sale of Land 19, 64%, the last bullet references this request for this lane purchase. So I had missed that when I went through the agenda when we first got it. I missed that point that earlier that there was all this support correspondence. So my view is that I would be supporting selling this land to Mr. Sander when we get to that. There's one question I have. If people do not choose the option of buying this land, and they have encroachments, you make a comment about they would be responsible for ongoing maintenance. Is that you referring sort of making the place fire safe, cutting the grass? It's referenced in your second recommendation. It says the purchaser must agree to assume any utility right of way applicable. That's fine. Further, that any owner with encroachments that does not purchase city land be required to remove all encroachments at their own cost prior to September the 30th, 2020. I support that as well. But this is where my question is coming from. Further, the ongoing maintenance of the identified land be permitted as long as public access is not restricted. There you're talking about keeping the grass cut if they so choose to, keeping it fire safe for their property, that sort of thing. Is that what's implied?
Yes, so through your worship, correct.
It.
Pardon me?
But they can't fence it.
Yes, so essentially remove your infrastructure, being fencing, sheds, whatever else may be back there. If they choose to continue to manicure that grass, that's
fine. Yeah.
That's fine, as long as there's public access to that space.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to have that clarified for myself.
So from the time we identified this complaint that was given to us, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years ago, on the encroachment, the infrastructure that was built in the creek, and that's what drove the complaint to us that caused us to start the investigation into the encroachments that existed down there. I think we've had probably 3 or 4 public meetings with the affected residents or others who were interested in it. To me, this all of these discussions, all of this work has got us to the point today where we have a recommendation to allow for us, because we at one point didn't even know if we were going to be able to sell it because it was park, we thought it might be park land that would require some other things, but we're at a point today that I think gets us to allow us to move forward and deal with those folks who now have illegal encroachments that want to try to purchase the property, to resolve that, to be able to move forward with folks who don't want to and deal with the encroachments and move forward in a positive manner that I think gets us to a resolve for this issue that's been ongoing for 2 or 3 years. And I appreciate obviously all of the work that council's put into this over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. I don't know how long it's been. And also for us to move forward, and I'm now in complete support of moving it forward to allow those residents who are interested to purchase the property and put a process in place for those who don't want to, and how we deal with the encroachments and the future use of that property. So I'm in complete support of the recommendation.
Can I put forward the recommendation?
Sure.
I'd like to move this recommendation, number 2, that staff be directed to hire a land agent to proceed with negotiations with homeowners encroaching upon Chamberlain Park regarding the area of city land available for purchase, with the purchase contingent upon the following. A. Any offer to purchase must be equal to the assessed value of the land, include land title and legal fees, and must be accompanied by a $500 deposit. B. In efforts to reduce costs, the city will combine processes wherever possible, allowing each purchaser to share the costs for the following. 1. OCP/rezoning application. 2. The basic land agent fees estimated at $392.50 for a simple interaction. 3. Actual subdivision survey and advertising costs. 4. The city's costs from 2017 to March 2019, which equates to $996 each. C. The purchaser must agree to reimburse the city for costs related directly to their own property, including but not limited to any additional land agent re-engagement fees for moderate to highly complex interactions at $105 an hour. D. The purchaser must agree to assume any utility right-of-way, if applicable. Further, that any owner with encroachments that does not purchase the city land be required to remove all encroachments at their own cost prior to September the 30th, 2020. Further, that ongoing maintenance for the identified land be permitted, as long as public access is not restricted.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilbur, discussion. Councillor Lexon?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a couple of quick ones and reasoning. City costs incurred to March 2019. Why are we cutting it off there? Have we incurred no additional cost on this file up until today?
For Your Worship, there is additional staff costs.
So I think, I mean, in all fairness to the taxpayers who aren't gaining additional land to their lots, those costs should be incurred in this as well. So I would move an amendment to the motion to that, stating all city costs be recovered up to the date and conclusion of this, because we will incur additional costs. If that's acceptable.
Okay. So as an amendment, do we have a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Javetkov? Further comments you had, Councillor Lexon?
Not on this, just that was...
Thank you. So further discussion? Councillor Javetkov?
Maybe it's been discussed and I missed it, but I'm just wondering about the end result for the boundary here. Are we
Excuse me,
going
Your
to
Worship.
have...
Sorry?
Before, just procedure, we should vote on the amendment.
On the amendment first? So just discussion on the amendment first?
Yeah. Okay.
Any discussion on the amendment that we include all costs up to and including to conclusion of the file? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Javetkov.
Yeah, I just wondered what the administration anticipates the end result of the boundary to be around Chamberlain. Is it going to be a bunch of jobs for people that don't buy in, or some people haven't encroached, so there's obviously, you know, lots that don't have any extra. This boundary here looks like it's, you know, it's not uniform, but it's fairly uniform. But in the end, what is it gonna look like?
It probably will not be uniform in the end, because if people choose not to purchase that additional property, then it will have a lack of consistency around the property line. And that'll be for us where we've identified in that section D that if people want to continue to maintain that area, they just can't close it off. It'll still remain part of the park, that property. Duncan?
Through your worship, if approved, the intent is as straight a line as possible as we move forward. The map you have in front of you, we were really using our GIS and had walked the area, and we were trying to capture what we saw as infrastructure, but the comments we've received back from the residents in these areas, you know, I would move that, or I don't need that amount. So it will be as straight as possible. However, anybody who does not want to purchase, there will be a jog in that area that goes to the existing property line.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Lexter?
Just a quick question through to administration. On the cost estimate per property that I look at, can you tell me, excluding assessed value, I know it's $905 each for the city's costs incurred, I'm guessing, to the March, so that could go up, say, to $1,000 for the sake of a number. What would a property owner pay if total, excluding the assessed value, to get this transfer to happen? I can't find a number anywhere in here that says if the assessed value was $20,000, it's going to cost every property owner an additional $10,000 to get there, $5,000. Because at some point, my concern would be surveying a straight line as straight as we can and cutting it shouldn't take $5,000 a lot to do this. I mean, for the land agent to even go and negotiate all this. I think maybe what we want to entertain is saying, look, you know, I'm not real supportive of giving up parkland, but because this is 20 plus years old and nobody's dealt with it, we're going to make an exception here. But we're going to say, like, I don't think we want lines all over the place. I think we want a straight shot, and we're going to divide the lots and add whatever it is, X feet. But can you help me on a cost breakdown to say it's going to be assessed value plus the city's costs that we've incurred plus this? Do we know it's 5,000, 6,000, 2,000? I haven't seen that.
Okay.
So through your worship, I believe that was in the last report that we provided to council. But essentially each property is going to have to be surveyed at least 3 sides to separate the property from the neighboring property. There is going to be some work to this. Unfortunately, I don't have that number for you. As we've moved this forward, there's been a lot of discussion, and we've moved in a few different ways. So if approved today, we'll go to work on some of that costing and getting some of those people hired and figure out exactly what those numbers are. Brenda, do you have any estimate? I know you're looking through your old report.
No, there was so many variables just because of the different size of properties and the different legal costs that one property owner might get to another one who deals with their own land transaction. So there's just so many variables.
Just, I guess the reason I asked, I want it as clear to the purchaser, to the residents as possible, so they're not caught off guard, but the cost would be theirs, not the city's. The one other thing I will just ask, when I look at the lines, and I think on the map that we've been presented, and I know this isn't the final map, we've got a couple with extensive outcrops to it. When you look at the 1V, 17. Is there a reason for that one that is exceptional, or would we not be better looking at a straight line across there?
So,
Duncan?
Through your worship, the intent is a straight line. We were trying to capture the infrastructure as best we could when we did this original map, and really the exercise at that time was showing how far into the park some of this infrastructure was. The intent is we'd like a straight line. We don't want anything jutting out. The straighter the line, the better for the future, just for the city and for the residents.
Okay, and a couple of quick follow. The one looks relatively close to the creek, exceptionally close. The riparian zone setback is all looked after. They would have to meet that by law anyway, as I understand it. So that one is not encroaching on a riparian setback of that creek.
So through your worship, I'll ask Kevin, I know he did some work in that area.
Yeah, through your worship, without looking at it, yeah, we're gonna have to work with each individual owner, any that are proximate to the creek, and ensure that they're set back, especially with their OCP and their designation and riparian areas and all those factors will come in.
Okay. Now, and I'm not trying to monopolize here, Your Worship. Now, we talked about right-of-ways. They would have to accept legal right. Do we have any legal right-of-ways through there today? I don't. We do?
Yeah. So through your worship, I believe there's a natural gas line that borders, and I think it's on the map there in kind of a light blue, right on the back of those properties. So there will be a right of way through there.
So the owners would know if they actually do put a fence over it and there had to be a dig, it's at their full cost to replace all of that and...
Yeah, it'll be that easement or that right of way will be identified as part of the sales, or typically is.
Okay. And I have one last question. This is my last one. So as we deal with this unusual circumstance, and that it is, are we confident that we have no other encroachments in our parks anywhere in the city? Because if we do, I think we would have to ensure we treat them the same, which worries me. Because I'm not a big supporter of giving parkland, or even selling parkland.
Totally.
Okay.
So through your worship, I cannot sit here today and say that there are no other encroachments in parks. There are, and as far as council's approach, some of them will be a case-by-case basis. Essentially, this is probably one of our most long-standing encroachments, where the homeowners believe this was part of their property. I can't speak to the other encroachments in the community.
Okay. Costs may be I believe realtors carry insurance for this. So when somebody goes to buy a house, if it is portrayed as X and somebody buys it and it turns out to not be that, as I understand it, there is insurance carried by realtors who may have to become part of this at the request, not of the city, but of individual landowners. But I do know that. I raise the issue of other parks because I can tell you, if it comes before us a month from now or a year from now, and we have the same issue, we will be hard pressed not to do the exact same thing as we're doing for these residents.
Right.
So we may be setting a precedent.
Councillor Parsons.
Well, I can share that with absolute certainty that there's many encroachments into laneways and other sort of situations in the city. We know that, but parks I'm not aware of. But there's many other types of encroachments.
Councillor Javakla.
If I had to guess, I would say we do have encroachments in parks.
What's that?
But one of the things that we have now, at least, we've established a procedure that if city staff see an encroachment, they have to deal with it. We don't wait until the neighbor reports it because, you may never report anything on your neighbor. So that's one benefit. But I just had a question about part of the problem here originally was that people didn't realize where their lot boundary was. So they build a fence and it happens to be outside the lot boundary. Is there any requirement for these landowners to put a fence on the lot boundary now, or somehow establish where it is so that people are aware in the future? Because it's human nature. If you don't have it established, obviously, I've seen lots of them where they say, well, where's my boundary? Oh, it's over on that ridge. If there was a requirement to actually put a fence in or somehow delineate where that lot boundary is as a future reference, it would prevent some of this problem.
Duncan?
So through your worship, as part of this sale, council could make that a requirement. One of the concerns always when you have an inconsistent line is that people connect to the fencing, and so there may be properties that choose not to purchase But that fence is adjusted, and we find ourselves in a similar situation in the future where we have land that's actually a park that becomes fenced. So there could be concerns both ways with that, but they are not required to fence it at this point.
Thank you. Further discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you to Duncan and Brenda and Kevin and all the staff who, like I said, I think it's been 2 or 3 years that this has been ongoing. Lots of public engagement by council with the folks, and we did do a process of reaching out and engaging in the community in this. So I'm going to go Councillor Parslow and then Councillor Jureka.
Well, I'd like to make a motion concerning the laneway request now. I'd like to move that we accept the offer from Ben and Linda Sander to outright purchase the closed walkway between the lot between lots 32 and 33, Plan 24081.
Thank you.
And that land would then become part of 10701 Pinecrest Lane and taxed accordingly.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Jureka. Discussion. Councillor Earl, then Councillor Wilbur.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question with respect to the motion as passed. So I was under the impression that prior to approving the sale, staff was going to check with the neighboring property in the event that ownership had changed and they had an interest in purchasing half of it. Is that something
outside our policy? Duncan?
So through your worship, with the direction that's in front of us now, that council's considering, we would not approach them and ask them in any interest to purchase that land. However, through the disposal of that land, they will get notification, I believe, and so you may hear from them at that point.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Wilbur and then Councillor Parslow.
Actually, I was going to ask along that same line too, if Councillor Parslow was saying he just wanted to waive the policy versus contacting the neighbor first and seeing. But I do believe in through all of this communication that somewhere in there, the neighbor at whatever time did say they were fine with it, but yeah.
Brenda?
And if you really get into it, the roadway dedication has been removed. So it's no longer actually a walkway, it is just city land.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. Councillor Parslow, then Councillor Lexton.
The reason for putting forward the motion without any of the references that some people are making is that this we have proof of correspondence, and this has basically been de facto the situation for 30 years. So the previous owner, I believe Peter Demert, who is many of us would know, had no interest in it, and so there was a motion by council that's documented here that agreed to that. So why open a... So implicit in it is, yes, we're waiving policy based upon previous council resolutions and 30 years of history.
Thank you. Councillor Jureka?
Same thing. It's we've got a long history to it. We've got all the documentation. We've got all the excerpts out of minutes and everything else there, as proof. So I agree with just proceeding with the sale.
Thank you. Councillor Lexton?
It's just speaking to it, I'll speak from the other side. I'm not sure the same people are in that house today that were there 30 years ago. And if I was the new owner of a home and found out that, 30 years ago a decision was made, but nobody told me when I bought the house, I think I'd be concerned. So I would see no problem with moving ahead with the sale pending no objection from the neighbor who may or may not be interested today versus 30 years ago. That is a long time. So I will move an amendment to the motion that states that we check with the neighboring property owner prior to selling this property, and with no objection we proceed. If there is a wish of that neighbor, then they would have to split this sale down the middle. Pretty loose motion.
Amendment to the motion that we contact the neighbors to confirm their interest or lack thereof, or if their letter of May 1st, 85 still applies. Seconded, yes. Councillor Wilbur. Discussion on the amendment. Councillor Jureka.
Isn't that a moot point? Brenda just said that it's not a walkway. It's just city land. Yeah. So when we dispose of city land, it is advertised. so we do get feedback. So,
It's covered by a land sale.
Is this advertised then? I was unaware it's been advertised for sale.
No, it would.
It hasn't.
This hasn't, it will need to be once.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
requirement that we need to post it for sale. That we are disposing of the land.
And what happens if the neighbor says, I want it?
Then it comes back.
Then it would come back to council.
goes up for the auction sale.
Councillor Wilbur?
To me, it's one of those pieces similar to another laneway that is just land, not used as a laneway, that the council has seen many times over in the past since I've been elected, and the two neighbors could never come to an agreement on splitting it, and so there it sits again. And I will say, this will set precedent, and we'll see all those people back again. So even though we say it's land, it is still shown in our master transportation plan as a part of our walkway system. So that's why I'm happy to support the amendment, because I think we need to make sure those people next door are aware and have the option, because we have set a precedent by following our policy to other families that have come here and said we would like to purchase that laneway. So I just think it's good practice, and we're being transparent. Somebody wants it, would you like it, or can they have it? They may come back and say, no, we're not interested, give it to them, but I think they should have that option, and not just see it posted for sale, and do we want comment from them?
So I think, honestly, I think clarification from Brenda, our corporate officer there, and how we have to deal with the sale of property. It does get advertised. It does give anyone interested in that the opportunity to express their interest in it, and it is covered off in the policy. So, further discussion on the amendment? Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Opposed, Councillor Javetkov. And on the main motion that we proceed with the sale, pending our policy, to Ben and Linda Saunders. Councillor Lexer?
I've got a quick question. Pending our policy, what policy, land sale or lane closure? I thought my amendment was I want to notify the adjacent neighbor who, with no objection, we could proceed with this. If there's an objection, then we'll have to deal with it.
So we will notify, I think your motion was we will notify them, and it will be posted under our land sale policy. It has to be proceed that way. We just can't sell it.
The key for me is the notification of the neighbor.
Yeah.
My guess is they're not going to be concerned and this is going to proceed. I just think as a common courtesy to the neighbor, we want to do that.
Duncan?
So based on the approval of the amendment, and if approved, our first step will be contacting the neighbor now to see and get some feedback from them before we proceed with anything else.
Thank you. Further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 7.2, we have report 19152 from the corporate officer regarding the 2020 council meeting schedule. Councillor Parslow?
Move the report 19152 from the corporate officer, the 2020 council meeting schedule be received. Further, the council adopt the following 2020 council meeting schedule: January the 13th and 27th, February the 10th and 24th, March the 9th and 23rd, April the 6th and 27th, May the 11th and 25th, June the 8th and 22nd, July the 20th, August the 17th, September the 14th, October the 5th and 26th, November the 9th and 23rd, December the 7th and 21st.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Lexstrom, discussion? Councillor Parslow?
Just would like a refreshment of memory. Our last meeting in December of 2019 is when?
Duncan?
Through your worship, I believe it's December 16th. We had originally scheduled a December 9th and 23rd, I believe, were the dates. And last meeting, that was changed to December 16th.
To accommodate Councillor Javetkov's travel plans.
Well, it just as I was reading this motion, it occurred to me, and a long time between December the 16th and January the 13th. That's just why is that the case? That's a question to
it was the 23rd is just because it hit so close to the Christmas is why we felt we should.
Oh, I understand I understand December.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the gap
between then and January 13th.
We've established a month's gap, and so as I was reading this, I was saying, oh, I don't want to move this, but I started.
Well, there's probably, I would honestly anticipate that we're going to have a fair number of special meetings called between and through this winter cycle because of our budget, et cetera. But it was just the 23rd was just the Monday before Christmas was the reason for that. Looking at that.
Well, also I'm going to be away for both meetings in January.
So why do you even bring it up then, Parcel?
Further discussion on the motion. You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 7.3, Report 19154 from the Corporate Officer regarding acting mayor appointments. Councillor Wilbur?
Sure, I'll move that report number 19-154 from the corporate officer regarding the 2020 acting mayor schedule be received. Further, that the acting mayor schedule for 2020 attached to the report be approved.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Lexstrom. Discussion? Councillor Wilbur?
Did Councillor Parslow check his months to see if he's going to be here?
We'll work that out.
Dale and I will work that out.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 7.4, we have report 19149 from the General Manager of Development Services regarding proposed BC Transit service reduction options. Councillor Parslow?
I move that report 19149 from the General Manager of Development Services re proposed BC Transit service reduction options be received for discussion.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Kemp. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Floor is yours. Councillor Lexstrom.
Thanks, Your Worship. And as we look at changes, not just to our budget, but specifically our transit options here in the city of Dawson Creek, I think they did a great job in presenting us with 5 different options. Probably only one jumps out at me as something that would proceed in my mind. But I also think there are some other options out there that we may want to consider, or at least have discussions possibly locally with. So prior to making a decision on where we go with transit in the city of Dawson Creek, I think there's an opportunity to go and enter discussions with some other providers that may be worthwhile, that can meet the needs of what we're after. So, the recommendation is to receive this for discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing others talk on it, but I have a couple of ideas, as we've discussed at this board before, brought forward by other councillors, that there may be options out there to provide a level of service that meets the needs of those most in need. It probably is not going to meet the needs of school children going from one end of town to the other. That began a number of years ago. It used to be handled by the school district under their busing system. They got out of it for a reason. And fortunately or unfortunately, we inherited it as the city of Dawson Creek and took that cost on behalf of the taxpayers. It comes with the ground. We actually have the flexibility, and parents do, to say, I'd like my child to go to this school. It may be on the other side of town from where they live. I think the responsibility is of the parent to get that child there. And it's unfortunate. If we were flush, we probably wouldn't, with money, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But it is going to, without question, I think, have to see some changes in our delivery model.
Thank you. Councillor Javetkov.
My concern is, we've got a number of months here. We wanted some information on an alternate delivery system for dealing with, the people that need rides. And we don't have that. We've got an adjusted BC Transit system, which, there's some savings there. Doesn't meet our original request. But what concerns me is if we don't approve something here, now we're delaying getting more information. We have to start researching on-demand service. It goes into next year, so we miss an opportunity to reduce costs now. My feeling, I think, is that we need to approve option 5, from my perspective, which gives us some savings for 2020. And in the meantime, look deeper to see if we can get an alternate system. You know, we've talked about Step Up and Ride. They have an on-demand system. That's why I was asking the question on peak capacity. So if you eliminate the need to transport students, what is the peak capacity? Are we talking, like, I often see a bus going by, you know, I mean, there are the empty ones, but there are also the ones with maybe 6 or 10 people in them. So 6 or 10 people per hour, is that sort of a peak capacity? Because I think we can accommodate that with a system like Step Up and Ride. You know, they may have to increase their resources, but there's an opportunity there. So I guess the bottom line is that I think we need to approve something here to get some savings for 2020 in hopes of, you know, trying to meet our goals for reducing costs, and in the meantime continue pursuing a different system that, you know, we can possibly implement, you know, for 2021. You know, these, like an 18-month study is alarming to me because, you know, we're not making any headway.
Thank you. Councillor Wilbur, then Councillor Earl.
You know, I agree we wanted to look at this, and sadly enough, I look at option 5 and think that's probably the way we have to go. But I think we also have to keep in mind that during those peak times and when students are on there, those are the people buying the passes that are creating the revenue we're getting from the system. And the other thing is, I've been doing a little bit of homework and talking to some of our lower income families, some seniors, and some self-advocates on using the system. And the reason they don't use the local system for door-to-door pickup is because of the cost. They can't afford $5 one way. So they're using the transit system and buying the passes. So I think we also have to look at, in a perfect world, yes, it would be great just to move to something else, but also we have to take into consideration it's not a perfect world, and the people that are using this service are using it because it's what is affordable for them. We did hear from the delegation, you know, they could remove that third route, do some tweaking of the first and second, so it's still a viable service for those that are using it. But the reality is the revenue's coming from the people who are buying the passes to use the service. We're also only charging the $1.75 for an adult, and I do believe I heard from the delegation that, you know, in other areas they're charging $2. So maybe that's some option too, at looking at who can afford to pay that $2 and get some more revenue there. But realistically, the people using the service are the ones we're collecting the revenue for, and the hardest hit are going to be the most vulnerable in the community. So when we talk about housing gaps and homelessness and all of that stuff, this is a component of that for these people. So we have to seriously take that into consideration. And a senior can afford what they're paying to use the bus now, or a self-advocate, they cannot afford $5 a ride, and that's through a service that's completely subsidized.
Thank you. So Councillor Earl, then Councillor Lexstrom, then Councillor Javecki.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to kind of echo the sentiments of the other councillors, I think option 5 is probably, of the options related to us, the most realistic, given what we're looking to gain in the budget. I do appreciate Councillor Lexstrom's sentiment that there may be some other private sector or non-profit sector options I'd like to continue to explore and learn more about. And I'm also sensitive to the timeline. One thing we haven't really brought up, and that has become increasingly clear as we look at these various models, is that school-age kids are a significant driver of the use and the peak times. Is it unprecedented? Would it be out of line to approach the school district? I know they got out of the business of busing for a reason, obviously, and it's probably not on their radar to get back into it in any capacity, but is it entirely unreasonable to, if we're going to continue to maintain this robust a service, largely for the sake of providing transport to kids within the school district, for them reach out to the school district and the various PACs to see if there's some sort of cost sharing agreement, MOU we can receive? I mean, I'm not very optimistic about that option, but I do feel like we have to kind of turn over every rock in this discussion, and given some of the other conversations we're having about cost sharing of city amenities with other user groups and levels of government, it might be worth having the conversation.
Thank you. Councillor Lexstrom and Councillor Giavecco.
Just speaking to, it was my understanding when we began our discussion on transit in our city, only one option was going to be through BC Transit. I thought we were going to reach out to other providers such as, and then we throw out Step Up and Ride. They may be surprised because I don't think we've talked to them yet. We may have. But if we were to move on option 5 and then look for other ideas, I'm not sure we're going to enter into a 6-month contract with BC Transit, because what they're talking about is nothing would occur next year until June.
That's right.
So the $231,000 would be cut substantially in savings to below half of that, because July and August there are no children users. I call them children users, bus users. So now all of a sudden we're looking at saving $100,000. Step Up and Ride, if it's one way $5, that's cheaper than the $7 plus subsidy that the taxpayers pay for every single ride today in the BC Transit system. So we have got some work to do here. This is not once again, this isn't a fun choice. This is a get our financial house in order choice. Like, there is some tough decisions coming, and this is but one. I think we're looking for $1 million+ this year in the operating budget alone. And as much as I would like to put decisions off, I don't think we have that prerogative.
Councillor Giavecco.
So, you know, our objective is to eliminate our use of fair share money for operations. That's what the goal that we have set. And it's, I think, 6.8 million over 7 years. We have a choice. We can either reduce our expenses to eliminate that draw on fair share, or we can increase taxes. And the tax increase to represent that 6.8 million would be between 40 and 50% tax increase. So the way I look at it, if we don't reduce the cost of transit, then we have to consider that that will be a tax increase. So, you know, we have the choice. Do we want to reduce that 626,000? Or do we want to say, okay, what we'll do is we'll continue paying it, and we'll consider that we will be increasing taxes by 4% or 5%, whatever it's going to be. That's the reality of it. You know, we can talk about all the poor people and people that can't afford this and that, but the bottom line is that we either reduce the costs or we increase taxes to accomplish that goal of reducing our draw on fair share.
Duncan?
So, through your worship, a couple questions have come up through this discussion that I wanted to address. So as we moved into this discussion, it became a little more complex. The discussion around alternate carriers. So one of our challenges as we entered into this report and as we entered into this research is we don't hold any of that data. We don't have transit planners. We don't have any of the data on the current transit routes, and this is something that we've been pushing Rob a little bit to understand, you know, where are these higher frequency areas. So to go out and approach a Step Up or Ride or a individual contractor is a bit of a big process that I can't deliver to you before the end of this year. To have an actual route and take a route to a carrier to say, other than the route we have now or the proposed route, and ask them for a quote to deliver that service at that frequency. I don't have that information. That's something we can get, but it's going to take some time. This is essentially in front of you, the best option, continuing partnering with BC Transit. And the other piece that I always note as well is whenever we partner, it's half of our service that we have today. If we choose not to partner into the future, it becomes a quarter because it's a shared contribution from BC Transit. So we're now looking at a service of $350,000. Now, I'm not saying that we can't use an alternate carrier. I'm saying if that's the direction council would like to go, we're going to need a little more time, and we'll have to put some resources into it as far as trying to figure out where the highest usage, planning a route, and then getting some quotes on that route. So it's a little more work. We can definitely do it. This was kind of our first opportunity to look what BC Transit and the City of Dawson Creek could do as a partnership. And also, this also has the quickest turnaround, essentially, as far as when it could be implemented. The on-demand piece, and I hear a lot of discussion, and I think that there's a different definition for on-demand, depending on where you look at that. But typically, an on-demand service is really that of a taxi, where it comes to your doorstep and picks you up. That's a very variable cost. In some cases, you're paying an individual route. In other cases, a provider will try to estimate how many trips they're going to make per month and charge you on that. So, again, I don't know that I could tell you exactly what that looks like unless the definition of on-demand is we're going to provide a couple key locations. So, really, today was to get some information in front of you and to have some more discussion with council. This is a key priority. It's a very big item for council and for the community, and to help us understand how we want to move forward.
So, if I can just clarify one piece, the implementation and communication piece says staff will work with BC Transit to implement the option chosen by council in the 2020 budget year. Any savings, because we have a contract with BC Transit that is in effect till next June, so any savings, any changes that we do not come into effect until next year in July, which would impact the 2021 budget.
So through your worship, if council chose to implement this in September, yeah, you would only realize a small portion of the savings that council's goal has, with the goal you've set. Yeah, 2021 is where you'd realize that full savings of the change.
Thank you. So Councillor Parslow?
Thank you. Well, I'm surprised we have this motion before us because I see this as only an important but not complete set of information because alternatives, options, different paradigms have not been explored by this council, and we haven't been presented with any. I do have empathy for Councillor Javaktov's point. If we choose not to cut something that is optional, then we need to find the revenue through taxation. But I'm not sure that was a part of the thinking of those people who were speaking prior to Councillor Javaktov, or even if they do support that. Councillor Earl talks about looking under different routes, as many routes as possible. I agree with that, and I don't think we've done that. I'm not aware, and I stand to be corrected, that we were given any decision date for when BC Transit needs to know which option. Obviously, they'd need to know prior to June of 2020, but so I don't see any need for this, and I would encourage council to defer any decisions until we've looked at other options in a more thorough way. So I will be voting against the motion.
We haven't got a motion.
Have no motion.
Just for discussion.
It was just discussion.
All right.
Just discussion.
What am I referring to then? Councillor Javaktov made some.
He was, we haven't had a motion put forward yet. We're in discussions.
We're just discussing.
It wasn't a motion. It sounded like one to me.
Are you
Councillor
making a
Lexer,
motion
then
to
Councillor Javaktov?
Following through, this may be our best option. That's the part I don't know yet,
Right.
option 5. But if we were to proceed, there may be, I can think of a number of discussions I'd like to have before committing to this, such as maybe our Dawson Creek Seniors Organization would entertain or have an option through a discussion that they say, we can deliver this service for this. They may look at that. I don't know. Spicker, Southeast Community Resources Society, who works with our vulnerable people throughout our community, may have ideas to say, boy, if we only had this, we could deliver a service that meets the needs of our clients. The Step Up and Ride, a discussion there. So My wish would be, and I know it may sound like a lot of work, we may have a discussion with each of these and they say, hey, thank you for considering us, but we are not interested, which makes it very quick. Or one or two of them may say, we're interested here, we're gonna do some work. So if we have the time, and I do believe we have the time, because the cost savings we're looking at all in under option 5, if it is to kick in September of 2020, is probably $50,000 we're gonna save in our budget. So there's 1% tax increase. I was looking at saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to help our budget. So I do think we have, and I would look, I know BC Transit is still here, a determination on if we go to option 5, for example, what is our latest date that we can give that information to BC Transit, which then will give us the time to reach out, maybe not reach a deal, but find out if there's an interest from these other parties I put forward. That would be my wish, which would mean, you know, I think we could have both. We could then understand where we're at with BC Transit. We could understand if we have any other people in our community that deal with the most impacted. I do not think we're solving the issue of school-age children on our buses. I don't think City Council is going to solve that issue. I do think, as much as I would like to think we could, we can't. I think we're going to hand it back to the school district.
Duncan?
Through your worship, I'm
The
sorry.
contract.
Yeah, sorry, the contract?
Yeah, so if we,
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Kevin knows the answer as far as the latest date to provide notice of change to BC Transit.
So in speaking with Transit just briefly, so it sounds like if you were going to implement a change by June of next year, which is what they recommended,
Yeah.
late November this year, they would need some notification on that to do the planning piece.
By late November. Okay.
We need about, sorry to interrupt, but we need about 6 months
Yeah.
to order to plan that. And just on the contract question, so basically what we would do is we would amend your current annual operating agreement effective June 2020, so you would see those savings starting in June 2020, because we would implement a new service with we would amend your agreement. Just like if we were doing an expansion, we would amend the costs up. This is just a optimization where we're amending the cost up.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Parslow?
So I'd like to make a motion then, seeing that there isn't one on the table.
Okay, I was up to talk next.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna start doing that.
So, when we discussed it, I don't think any of us thought that we could eliminate the cost for transit. I think when we discussed it, we looked at reducing our cost by 50%. That was the objective, to go out and find a system that would reduce our cost by 50%. This report doesn't do that. We would have to add another $80,000 to $100,000 reduction on this transit plan. And if we reduced it to 50%, or reduced our cost by 50%, I think then, you know, we've accomplished what we were after. I don't think any of us think that we can deliver that service for zero. And we still recognize the need to deliver a service, you know, for seniors. And so, why don't we go back to transit and say, look, keep crunching, come up with another $100,000, and you know, then we're not into doing a whole bunch of more research.
My concern is that by reducing to another 50% of the operational budget, modifying this schedule that much more, reducing service that much more, we already have a service, in my view, that isn't working, or we would have the ridership. It's not working for the community in terms of, it's working for a small segment of the community, but it's not working for the community. And we're going to reduce it more, that's going to reduce the service even less and even make it that less viable. And so to me, I honestly think that the engagement, we will hear in the community from this. This is going to spark a significant amount of discussion and consultation with the community, and I think that's another necessary point of this. And we will hear from, this is going to touch that nerve within the community about seniors, disabled, low incomes, and I think we need to have that engagement in terms of having that discussion. before we move into, I'm not in favor of making a whole bunch more amendments to this service. It's just going to make it that much less viable. Councillor Parslow?
Yeah, I do believe there's options to be explored with school district. I noticed with interest during the presentation that people are buying $30 a month passes for school children. I do know that private schools here run school bus and people pay $35 a month for that. So I think there are viable options for to be explored before we make any decisions. So I was, I think some conversations with school district are perfectly capable of happening between now and the last meeting in November, and discussions with the other agencies, and we can make a more informed decision at that meeting. So I'm going to suggest that we defer making any decisions about transit until the November the 25th meeting of the council.
Is that by way of a motion?
Yes.
Have a seconder? Councillor Lexstrom, discussion. Councillor Lexstrom?
With that, and I'll ask through to administration, at least allow us the opportunity to engage with the organizations, and you certainly, I've heard the school district discussion with them, Step Up and Ride.
Dawson Creek Society for Community Living.
Dawson Creek Society for Community Living, Spickers, our seniors organization, to reach out to see if there was any interest, because they may very well say, hey, thank you for the opportunity. There isn't any hope that we could provide this. And if that's the case, then as I said, this has not been an issue of a transit system not delivering good service. I mean, they have delivered wonderful service for us. Our problem is we put $7 per ride every time somebody steps on that bus, and we're in a financial situation where I don't think we can continue to do that.
Councillor Earl?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just adding to Councillor Lexstrom's point, I'd also add any stakeholder engagement in that respect involve reaching out to private companies to see if there's any options there with respect to who do we have in town. Diversified Energetic Services, previously Homer's Oilfield, and some other ones. I think it'd be worth having just a quick chat with them to see if there's any workable model they can conceive of.
Duncan?
So through your worship, just so I'm clear on the motion and that engagement, because I want to be very clear if we're engaging with the school district or we're engaging with some of these groups. The intent of the motion is we're going to go to these groups and ask them if they are able to deliver this service independently of the city.
A service.
A service for their clients, and that service would be funded by the city, or that service would be independent, and then we're really asking them if they need us anymore.
I think, go ahead, Councillor
I was
Lexstrom.
going to say, no, I mean, we're going to participate. The issue of the city going from 600,000+ to zero is not, in my mind, something we were after. We were saying, look, we've got a service, we recognize the importance of it. Unfortunately, we can't continue to afford the service that we have. We would like to cut that cost in half. Okay, BC Transit has come very close with option 5. They have come close. But we haven't yet reached out to the others who may surprise us. They may have something, although we're elected officials here, it may be a surprise. We don't have all the answers. It's, we get out there and we hear from people, and they may, again, I want to reiterate, they may come back and say, look, we just can't deliver it. Thanks for talking to us. School District 59, I think the discussion there, and I'd look to Councillor Parslow, is more, if we make a move, whatever move we make, chances are it's going to impact the transportation of children from school to school. So you guys may want to turn your mind to how you're going to deliver that service, if you are going to. I don't think they're going to deliver a transit system for us, but they may surprise us.
Duncan?
Okay, so through your worship then, and just on that piece, we would approach that through some notification, because unfortunately it's not clear to me who all of the users of the service are. It is a contract service, so we'll do our best to figure out who those groups are, but we will probably have to do some notification, whether it be via the newspaper or our website. So you'll see some of that to try to determine who these groups are and encourage them to come in and speak to us so we can get an understanding of who they are. The second piece, and I'm not sure if this was part of the motion or if this was a amendment from Councillor Earl regarding contacting some of the private groups, we can do that. I just need to know what that route is. Are we looking at option 5 and seeing if they can provide a better price at that option? Or, you know, what am I approaching them on, I guess? I just need some clarification.
That's, I think Duncan's earlier point about the data and the analysis of users, riders, that's all. Somebody, if they're gonna say, I can provide a service, what is the service you're looking to provide? What are the routes? What's the data, in order for them to give some input into whether it's, whether what we're proposing is viable. So that's gonna be the difficulty about all of this, is we don't have that data. We don't have that information. Councillor Wilbur?
Well, yeah, and I don't know who can clarify for me, but in that ask, I think if we, I get the private, but I also think you don't want to miss anybody either. So do you open it so they come to you versus us going to them? And then my other question is, are we approaching these people about door-to-door service, or are we approaching them about providing the service we have now?
Well, that's what Duncan's point is, I
Right,
think, about what is
so
it
that-
we're asking them to deliver.
So I need clarity on that, but also, I'm scared if we reach out to certain private entities, we're gonna miss somebody. So then, is the better option to just put it out there if you're interested? So reverse it, rather than having staff trying to connect the dots and figure out who everybody is.
I think we'll reach out to all of the various groups of agencies within the community that are providing services, and we'll do some advertising, and we'll start that process of getting to as many as we can and have that discussion. Duncan?
And through your worship, I mean, the common and our typical approach to somebody providing as a service is an RFP. And I mean, if council wanted to go down that road, you can state an amount and have people submit a proposal on what they can deliver for that amount, if that's where you wanted to go.
We just don't know what we're asking for.
Exactly, and I couldn't evaluate whether that will meet our needs or not.
Councillor Parzol? And
Just some information here. As it's been stated, there is a pot of money in our aspirations, there is a pot of money residual to provide some assistance getting people around the city. That, to me, is implicit in any invitations to come forward with a proposal. So I think you have an amount of money. That's my understanding, to be corrected by council, but I think there is. Going to the school district, just for information for all council members, because one or two of us had discussions at UBCM, is there was a big issue in the province around bus transportation in the school district. It is my understanding that certain curtailments of some funding occurred. What has happened, my understanding is that in some instances, parents are paying for the service. If people are paying BC Transit, they can pay the school district. If the school district wishes to or has the capacity to pick up students in the town, that needs to be explored. It's not in my mind that the school district would not entertain picking up other than school children. I'm sure of that. But those parents could equally pay the school district as well as BC Hydro. That would take a major portion of the ridership away, but the residual money could provide quite, I think, an incentive for the community organizations to take care of their own in a way that we can't picture. But to the private sector, you've got a pot of money.
Okay, we've had lots of discussion, and we're going to call the question. Are you ready? All those in favor? The motion is that we're going to direct administration to reach out to those community groups and seek some input into services that they may be able to offer and be interested in offering, and we'll bring that back to council as another options to this. And by November 30th, November 25th, we have the date set that we have to get this done by in order to meet the requirements for BC Transit's notification. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you.
That was easy.
That was easy. 7.5, we have report 19151 from the Chief Financial Officer regarding the 2020 budget assumption report. So maybe if we could begin with I'm almost hesitant to do this, a motion to receive for discussion.
Sure.
Councillor Wilbur, Councillor Kemp, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. And Duncan, Flavia, do you guys want to?
Go ahead, Flavia.
Well, good morning. Welcome for the kickoff meeting for the budget. So mainly these 2020 budget assumptions and timeline, we are presenting the key assumptions that we are using for this 2020, which starts with our 5 years plan, 2019 to 2022, that we prepared last beginning of this year. So the report address, again, on the first page of the report, the flow of our budget and the steps, the key steps, and how important it is to follow a balanced budget approach. We also address regarding to taxes, which is one of our main component of revenue, that the original budget used for 2020 was an average increase of 2.8%, which not necessarily everything was 2.8. It was 2% for all the classes except for major industry, where we had that approach of 2 increases in 2019 and about 17% for 2020. So that's our starting point. Also, because we are starting early in our budget, normally we started the discussions in January. Because we are bringing this in December, we will not have the BC assessment completed rows, the report that provide to us. So we started with a preview, which I thought that would be interesting to address here. Historically, in the last 4 years, when we get the 3 reports, preview, completed, and then revised in March, normally the revised is closest to the preview. The completed version is always inflated, not inflated, but sometimes it's overstated because we still need to go through the appealing process and then end up dropping. So the number that we will start as a revenue for property taxes is a reasonable number. Regarding to PRA, which is one of the key council's aspiration, and that in 7 years is to bring the current allocation from capital, which we project for 38% to 85% in 7 years. And we also have this report that we send early in January, by the end of January, we need to send to the province our PRA allocation. So that's something that we'll be working very closely on this budget. Regarding to fees and charges, we put some breakdowns here where some of the services are still, of course, operating subsidized by property taxes. Additionally, we included, for the purpose of capital projects, we started with the basis that we created in 2020. And management right now is reviewing, going through all the projects so that we can provide a detailed list for in December when we'll be discussing our draft one. There is one thing else I would like to address here about the reserves. So we closed last year with 20 million as a total reserve, including operating capital and statutory. There is another reserve that we don't show in our budget, but it's present on the financial statement. It's about 194 million, which is the reserve where we have the tangible capital investment. That's in line with what we've been acquiring as a capital through the years. So there is an expected reduction of our reserve due to some overstated that happened in the last series of years, that I will need to reflect that in our draft one. And the amounts in average 2.5. Probably this will be reducing our capital reserve from 13.4 to 11 million. So I thought that was important to bring this to the table.
So I'll jump in here, and Flavia and I have had some discussion about this. So essentially, approximately 18 years ago, there was what I'll call an administrative error. There was no misappropriation of funding. There was no transfer of funding, but essentially our tangible capital assets are assigned a value. And for whatever reason, 18 years ago, that value was shown as revenue in error. And so for about 18 years, we have shown $2.5 million more than actual because this value wasn't reassigned to tangible capital asset reserve. And as we've worked our way through it, it appears the province was aware and had just made that adjustment on our financial statements annually. And as we kind of dug into it here this year and last year, we were flagged for a different reason and noticed this adjustment and asked for some additional information on this adjustment and dug into it and found out, yeah, in fact, approximately 18 years ago, this administrative error occurred. So we need to correct that because we don't actually have that funding. And in working with our auditors, working with the province, it sounds like we can make that adjustment through our capital reserve. If we were forced to make that adjustment through our operating reserve, that would show a deficit, which is not permitted, as you're aware. However, it sounds like we can make that adjustment through our capital. So, you know, the most important piece that I'll add there is it happened 18 years ago, and over the last 18 years, I think it's also some adjustments were missed as well, I think. But essentially, it's really just a line item we need to fix.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to interrupt.
Actually, it's over 18 years. 18 years is the maximum we went to look for the difference. So then we stopped it. So we also reflected on this budget. The original 2020 budget has an inflation of 2% included there. So that's the basis where we start. However, management, they are going line by line item on the budget for expenditure and revising those numbers. We actually already collected them and they will be included. So we're gonna see some reductions there that management revised on the draft one. I think the key factors that we need to take in consideration when we talk about expenditure this year is that we will enter on the bargaining agreement review. So we don't have a rate set. It's still beginning of the process. I think the meetings is going to start the beginning of the year. So we'll be working with some projections there.
And typically, again, jump in there, typically council approves that mandate between now and end of year, and it's included within the budget and staff write that report based on averages throughout the province based on council's direction, and so you'll approve that and that'll be reflected within the budget at that time.
Yeah, and also our hope is that on this draft one we will be able to address some of the four topics that is key for the strategic for council. It's the sub-regional recreation and cultural services, tourism, transit, and fire department. So as much as I can have data to include that in the first draft, you'll be considering in the first draft. I also would like to address that's the first time we are having two budget consultation. One actually is scheduled for next meeting, October 21st at 1 p.m. And it's included in this report as an attachment, a suggested survey we created. So we're gonna have a paper version and also online. It's just quick questions asking the public if they have any suggestions for revenue, for reductions of services, and the door will be open for them on October 21st to come personally and discuss with us. And I think that's the key points for the budget assumption.
So just in summary, and just to kind of reiterate what Flavia said, we are early. Typically, council doesn't receive this budget assumptions report until November or later November, and we have additional information at that time that we don't have right now. We're still waiting on assessment. We're still waiting on PRA. None of the adjustments that have been made within the departments have been reflected in this report, and essentially the numbers you're looking at are the 2020. So what we're looking for council today is really some approval on that timeline, approval on the pamphlet and the questions that we will be asking the public. And if there's any substantial changes that council hasn't discussed, whether it be through strategic priority setting or through previous resolution, if there's substantial changes that you want to see in draft one, now would be the time. But again, I'd caveat that we don't actually know what those numbers are just yet, because we don't have assessment and we don't have some decisions in some of those strat priorities. So we're very early in the process right now. And really that December, I think, 16th meeting will be that first look at the draft and what those numbers are.
Thank you, Duncan, Flavia. So comments, questions from council? Councillor Parslow?
Yes, thanks for this. It's one topic that I think we need to clarify at council level is this the $7 million aspiration over 7 years. You have, in one of your assumptions, you have apportioned the elimination of that on an equal basis each year. There was discussion that I just need to have my memory jogged, or it may need a discussion that we were going to try to front-end load those. I'm not speaking against the assumption, but it's just for clarification.
Yeah.
Is that what we're aiming for, or not?
No.
So that's one question. I'll have a second statement in a minute.
So we can answer that quickly. So the 1 million is an average, just showing what's needed. As far as front-end loading, council's identified the 4 key priorities that may enable us to front-end that, but until we make those decisions, I can't answer whether it's going to be front-end loaded or not. Those are the priorities council selected, and it was a pretty robust process to identify those strategies and what we're looking for. And as we encounter today with transit, it's a big discussion.
Do you have a total, if all those aspirations were realized? Well, no, it's a little convoluted because we're also looking at revenue, so I'll pass on that altogether. Just Mayor, though, just the original statement I wanted to make is just looking at, for example, BC Transit. I find with interest and appreciation of having this in front of council is that you've shown this scenario from 2018 to 2023, how these cost centers with assumptions of inflation and so on, so like the concept, the transit contract rising from 776 to 840 in that time period, with a constant revenue source is interesting. The longer we maintain these cost centers, the bigger they get through inflation.
Councillor Lexon?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a couple of quick questions through. When I look at, and thank you for the work you've done. I mean, budgets are never an easy part of the job. Under background information, just for my clarification, we talked about the residential variable tax rate was held at 562, we'll say. The commercial rate was held at 17.52. Then we talk about the 2.5% mill rate increase. Have we, in our numbers, if we do an increase, 2.5, we're changing our mill rate. correct? So where are those assumptions built? Our 5-year plan is built on no change to the 562 or the commercial, yet we talk further about a 2.5% average increase. That's built into the numbers you presented under this budget assumption?
So when I build up the 5 years, so the 2019 had the 2.5% over the assessed value. So for 2020, we assume the same assessed value of 2019, right? And then a 2% increase over all the classes except major industry.
Right, which we
that had the
changed
17%,
okay.
yes.
So that's how that was built?
Yes.
I have, just as we go through this, bear with me, I've marked them down. There was a talk in here about a policy that council has. Let's look through the series of bear with me. I'm holding you up, I know. In addition, there's an operating restricted reserve. Here, just going down to the restricted reserve, it says, in addition there is, and this is substantially down page 11 of 19, in addition, there's an operating restricted reserve of $255,000 available to cover short-term deficits. Council has chosen to offset any deficit generated by lack of fees updates versus current incurred waste expenditure to be funded by this reserve. Is this, when was that policy set? My idea of balancing our budget using reserve scares me, and I hope we're shifting away from that.
So Flavia wasn't here when that happened. So essentially, and I want to say it was 2017, before we were into recycling. We identified a surplus. We also identified that the cost of garbage and that service was more than we were receiving in fees. And at that time, council said, we're going to continue to use this surplus and keep those rates the same. And so that was a resolution of council at that time. Flavia, do you have any? I know you had looked at a little bit of information on it, but I think it was 2017, yeah.
Yes. I guess just following through on that, I will make an effort to change that. I mean, these should be self-sustaining services. The chart below, the comment I've just made where I pointed out on page 11 of 19, shows clearly that our garbage collection and recycling, we don't cover the cost. We're subsidizing those and we're using a reserve. And I'll look to you, Mr. Mayor, when do you want the resolution to say that policy has to stop and change so we're not using reserves to balance a budget?
So I think that those are absolutely really good discussions right now for us to give direction to administration as they start to build some of this financial plan that's going to come forward in December, and we need to have that for our public consultation. So if a council has some will for that, then I think it's absolutely appropriate.
I would at this time, Your Worship, make a motion that our staff be directed to ensure full cost recovery for the waste services portion of our budget and to not utilize our restricted reserve to offset any shortages, as that should be fully covered.
Beginning in 2020.
Beginning in 2020.
Seconded, Councillor Parslow. Discussion? So that would indicate $75,000 of additional fees would be charged into our waste services for 2020. Councillor Javecka?
So my understanding when we discussed that that was not a reserve, it was a surplus in the garbage account. So rather than charge the full rate, we were going to utilize that money until it was gone and then charge the full rate. So is it an option to move that into a permanent reserve, or not a permanent reserve, but a reserve for capital?
Duncan?
So through your worship, I would have to go back and take a look. I do remember the discussion, and my understanding, and I don't know how much Flavia's dug into it, my understanding is that was a surplus from that service. and that it was a fee for service and it was restricted to that service, but we'll have to go back and take a look at that and see what the options are.
So we do have a motion that we're going to not use the reserve to cover off the operating deficit. And you guys can bring that back then through the budget.
Yeah.
In order to identify that question about what is in the reserve, what can be utilized for, and the options for that reserve as a piece of that motion that we have, that we're not going to use it for the operating expense under that service.
Okay.
Councillor Lexler?
I guess just phone through. It wasn't my intent to double charge the people of Dawson Creek. So if they paid and this reserve is built up from an overpayment on these services, then to raise the fee to cover the full cost and leave this $255, I guess you're going to bring it back. My intent is not to double charge our taxpayer, but if all of a sudden it costs us more and we have to utilize that until we get to that point, that may be an option you look at. But yeah, I didn't read it that it was solely raised on this, but it was a reserve. I thought maybe it was for the replacement of garbage cans. You do need some reserve there. I don't want to go down to nothing, so we're going into general revenue to replace at least.
So I think it's a great discussion and great information for council to have that discussion and decision about that direction to administration. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Go ahead.
I just have a couple more, Your Worship. So we talk a lot about the sub-regional recreation and different services we receive. We talk on page, it's 120 and 159 of our agenda, and page, let me just check, it looked like 12. I think we want to, when we discuss, it says 602,000 for recreational requisitions, which currently is one of council's. We want to ensure that when people read this report, they know that a portion of that is funded from the city directly already. I just think I throw that out for, if there's a better way to write it, whether we put it in parentheses or something that says X is already paid by the city of Dawson Creek, because to read that, you would think we were getting a grant of 602. Is that, if I'm not making sense, just jump out. I just want the general public, when they read a report like this, to know, hold it, we're getting this. Because I think it's 300,000+.
Yeah. I mean, like, we get 602, like, we receive a check of 602,
Yes.
but then the residents in their tax are paying a portion that's equivalent to 300.
Yeah, just if we could highlight that, just for, and that's more for the public when they're reading this.
$300,000 comes from the residents of the city of Dawson Creek into the PRRD requisition that they pay for that taxation to the Peace River Regional District. And we get half of it back. Or we get it back plus 300 more.
Yeah.
I do, sorry, Your Worship, going through. I will go down now under operating and capital expenditure, spending and service provision. Service provision and capital investment spending are determined by council's past decisions and commitments, then by assumptions. The 2020 original financial plan used an inflationary forecast of 2%, and the realization of council's initiative in 2019 contributed to a reduction of $198,000 in operating expenditures. Did I read that all we saved in our full operating budget last year is $198,000?
Net of the inflation projection.
Net of inflation.
Net,
So you see,
yes, I get that, but we started at 1.3 million to try and reduce our costs. So, you know, I kind of knew the answer to this question.
Oh,
going
I
into
see.
it, But
You're just making
that
points.
should jump out as a concern, not only to our council, but to all of our taxpayers, of the magnitude of the changes that we have to look at in our budget. That is, although $198,000 is not small money, it is nowhere near the $7 million that we are looking for within our budget to get into a reasonable financial picture, not a rosy financial picture. So that jumped out at me as one that was of significant concern for me. And you know what, I'll leave it at that for now until I hear
Thank
from
you.
others. I've got.
Further comments, Councillor Parslow?
Well, just to add to Councillor Lettstrom's there, that started out with me, but then if our tax increases, right, have kept up with that inflation, then we're still getting the benefit. But if we want to eat into it, we have to get rid of cost centres if we don't want that inflation thing to eat away at everything we do, or increase tax.
Thank you. Further
I'd like
comments?
to make the recommendation.
Yep.
If I may.
Go ahead.
Am I touching you short?
I just have a couple of further questions if I
Go
can
ahead.
before. I want to go down to debt servicing, question there. Just a question under the, it says past decisions related to loan authorizations have already been made. The estimate for 2020 debt servicing is 3.633, a decrease of 106. An updated forecast will be provided during the budget process. The total outstanding balance for long-term debt amounted to $27.3 million. The decisions of previous councils, I'm not a believer, I think debt is not the worst thing in the world if you have it in a reasonable position to your income and so on. Is the premise of this statement based on no more borrowing at
No.
this point?
No, it's based on the, when we build up the 2020,
Yeah.
there was no expectation of borrowing for 2020. So assuming at that point, that were the amounts that we have. So
Okay.
if the council, like in the draft one, comes a decision based on whatever capital, list of capital projects we have and said, okay, we want to go and borrow, so then this would need to reflect the debt services impact and everything. But this based on, again, original 2020.
Previous,
Yeah.
okay. Would it be possible, Your Worship, to have, certainly Flavian administration, bring us a scenario based on what our debt load is today, where we're at based on what is our maximum debt load allowed based under the charter, and where we're at in comparison to that. Again, debt incurred, most people incur debt for their houses, for their cars. We incur debt for infrastructure, roads, and, you know, I think we need a great deal of road work in our city. So I'd like to know if we have flexibility on debt servicing, where we're at on that, I guess. And with that, I will cease to ask questions till our next
Thank
budget
you.
meeting, Your Worship.
Councillor Parslow?
I'd like to move the report 19151 from the Chief Financial Officer, the 2020 budget assumptions and timeline report be received. Further discussions on the following recommendations be approved as presented below. 1, that the 2020 budget timeline be approved as presented. 2, that the 2020 financial plan be based on the principles and values included in the city's vision, mission and guiding principles documents and other bylaw and policy documents. 3, that the methodology used in preparing the 2020 financial plan be based on an integrated and long-term approach to setting tax rates, fees and charges and service provision.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Earl? Discussion? So I have a aspect to this that I wanted to bring forward, and it deals with the heavy and light industrial tax rate. And I had the opportunity to meet with some of them this past week who have expressed some interest in the significance of the changes that we've implemented to the tax rates for them over the last year, as well as plan for 2020 that's built in the assumptions. And the increase in both assessment and the rate has caused a significant impact to them, more so than certainly I didn't realize when we had talked about this, about that assessment being a significant increase as well as the tax rate. So now it's caused a much bigger issue. And so my only concern is that I want us to have some discussion about that and bring that information back to council for your information. It's built into the assumption in terms of our forecast, and I want to bring that information back to council that we've had so that you guys can have a look at it before we lock it in. And I don't know if it's necessary to do it today, but it is built into the budget assumption. Duncan?
So through your worship, through the last year budget process, council identified an increase in 2020 to that major industrial rate. So in 2019, the rate was $27.12, and in 2020 it will be $32.50, and that's what you'll see in that first draft of the plan.
And it come from about $18.
So in 2017 it was $16.75. Yeah, 2018 $22.81, 2019 $27.12, and 2020 $32.50.
So there are 4 properties that exist within heavy industry: AltaGas, Air Liquide, Ferris, and LP. And so it's caused a significant impact on that 3-year jump. And certainly not that we're bringing it up, but just to where it's going in 2020 is raising a concern for them. Go ahead.
What was the provincial average again, or northern average? Do you know that offhand?
Our provincial average was in around $40 or someplace like that. We were low.
Regionally,
and as an example, Fort St. John's was $27 or something.
Okay.
So, Duncan?
Yep, through your worship, Flavia has the information here.
Yeah, the average, it doesn't have all but the key and same structure is 53.98.
All right, thank you.
We have communities up around $80 or $90 that are relying completely on heavy industry as the big aspect to their communities, where they have the mills or things like that. And we were at the other end of it, where we dropped it down in 2008, 9, 10 in order to, and the only property we had at that time was LP. So anyway, I'm not making any recommendation at this point, but I think council needs to review that and have a look at it to see the impacts to our heavy industry in our community. I'll raise it as an item that I'll bring back forward. I'm fine with the assumptions that they're built into. Further discussion on the motion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Flavia and Duncan and everybody that get us to this stage. Item 8, bylaws, highway closure and dedication bylaw for the property at the Dawson Creek and District Exhibition.
So moved.
Councillor Parslow, second. Councillor Kemp, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. And A2 is the land sale for the exhibition for that property. Councillor Wilbur, second. Councillor Parslow. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 8.3, bylaw notice enforcement bylaw number 4425 for consideration of adoption. Councillor Javetkov, move. Second. Councillor Kemp. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. 8.4, our municipal ticket information system amendment bylaw for adoption. Councillor Javetkov for adoption. Second. Councillor Kemp. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 8.5, we have report number 19159 from the Chief Financial Officer regarding our permissive tax exemption bylaw for 424 2019 for first 3 readings. Councillor Parslow. Councillor Wilbur. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Mayor's business. Not much. University of British Columbia continued to do the research in partnership with the BC Oil and Gas Commission and Resource Works. They're doing a bunch of independent studies, science-based study. Methane emissions into groundwater is one of them, and I attended a forum open house in Fort St. John about 2 weeks ago. I really encourage and I really like the fact that these guys are doing this to be able to help give us really good information about the development of the resource sector in our region and our impacting our information that people have. And this is really good independent science-based studies that are being conducted, and I find it very interesting. They were at Calvin Crook Centre about a month ago and they continue to do this work, and I attended the session. Councillor Parslow?
Is air quality part of their study?
So this one here is, this particular study is specifically around methane emissions into groundwater. Okay. They're doing some seismicity studies. They're also doing one other one, but it's just that they're partnering with the educational institutions, UBC, SFU, University of Northern BC, with UBC, or with Oil and Gas Commission, and with Geoscience BC, and with Resource Works. So it's really good work, I think. I want to give a real positive to the Edmonton Oil Kings Prince George Cougars event that was here 2 weeks ago, and it was a great weekend, and really well attended by the community, and the kids, the players got out in the community, and they were at the hospital and the Rotary Manor and the library, and hosting events at the arena and stuff. I thought they did a great job, and really appreciate the opportunity that created for, I was in Grand Prairie on the weekend, and some people come up to me and told me what a great time they had coming to the games. So it drew from all over our region, which was very good. At the same time, they did the Dawson Creek and District Hospital Foundation Gala that night, and I think the overall results of that event that Friday night was around $35,000 or $40,000. They're still adding and tallying it up. But what a great event to be able to leverage and tack on to that Edmonton Oil Kings Prince George Cougars, and see the Hospital Foundation do the work they did to generate the kind of revenue they did. I think the 250/50s were around $6,000 or $7,000 each. So how good is that for our Hospital Foundation? And I think pushed them up into the near the top of where they were hoping to get this year for their fundraising. TransCanada Energy, Coastal GasLink hosted an open house at the George Dawson Inn and a job fair about 2 weeks ago, and they continue to do a really good job of reaching out in the community and the region about the opportunities that are created by this major infrastructure project at Coastal GasLink. And so I was really happy to see a number of our business community there and supporting, trying to push the opportunities for our local business people in that market. I attend on a regular basis the Regional Community Liaison Committee for Site C, and it's a committee liaison group that we continue to meet with the proponents of Site C, BC Hydro Partners, and all of the aspects around that project. And on 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we had the meeting in Taylor, and we got an opportunity to go up the river on riverboats and saw the project from the river. And it was really amazing to see kind of how the magnitude of where it's at, and they're on the diversion tunnels now, and there's a whole bunch of major work going on there, and it was just very interesting to see it from the water. I attended the Forest Renewal Engagement Workshop in Fort St. John about a week and a half ago, and it's really about forest lands and natural resources reaching out and trying to build a process of understanding fiber supply, tenure, and all of that stuff, and seeking input from communities and community stakeholders and industry. And so there was a 2 or 3 hour opportunity at that in Fort St. John about 2 weeks ago, and attended and really welcomed the opportunity to give some feedback into that. And it's important for our community as well, because we do have LP here, and LP is a major employer and a major piece of the economy, and want to make sure that we stay engaged in that understanding of the support to the forest sector for our community. In Union of BC Municipalities meeting was a full week, and I got the agenda, and I'll post it online for what we attended and what we got. But there were 3 or 4 really major events. And the Minister of Municipal Affairs we met with, Minister of Health, Adrian Dix, we met with over our hospital and some of the components around that. And it's my expectation, based on what the minister said, the planning pieces, the business plan is in the final stages of completion. I expect it will go to Treasury Board this winter, and he'll be here in May or June to make the announcement that they're moving it forward to tender, and the hospital will be under construction shortly thereafter. And that's such a big piece of stuff for us. And there's no doubt in my mind, based on our meeting with the minister, that this project is full steam ahead, and it's a very positive for us. We had TransCanada. I met with TransCanada folks when I was down there. Met with Dean Clark and Global Spectre, and we met with our new manager of the event center, Dustin, who will be starting, I think, this week, tomorrow. Yeah. Northern Health, I must sit on the Northern Health Advisory Committee for their connection service, the bus service, and I attended a meeting with them for 2 hours on Wednesday, and it's just about the connection service, the bus service that Northern Health provide for our region. And myself and Jerry Thiessen, the mayor of Vanderhoof, were part of that committee, giving feedback into the bus service that transportation service that Northern Health provide, and it's growing and it's getting more and more diverse. They're looking at connecting the north now into Kelowna and the interior because of the cardiac services that a lot of people from northern BC go to Kelowna now for that cardiac service. So they're looking to connect that transportation service in there, and they've done a really good job of building that. The resolution sessions we sat in, and it was a busy part of it, and I'm going to end it at that. It was a busy week and a very productive week. We met with CN as well, I should mention, and I think that was a very positive session. I wasn't able to go because of a conflict, but I think Councillor Lexstrom and Wilbur and Kemp were there, and we met with the Minister of Transportation over the Greyhound service as well as the 8th Street Bridge. That's a busy week for UNBC. Last Thursday, we hosted the interagency meeting. It's a meeting that was set up by Damon, Staff Sergeant Morrell, in the community of all the various agencies in the community that deal with aspects of services in our community. And it's really a good opportunity for all of us to connect and get to know who we all are. So the fire department are there, the police are there, the hospital are there, the conservation service, the city, on and on, this community organizations, the Encana Event Center. And if we had an event where it was an emergency or something, then we know who the contacts are in our community. And so every quarter we meet and we each take an opportunity at hosting the meeting. And so last week we hosted it. We talked about emergency planning. I invited Trish from the RD. The chief was there, gave an update on our emergency planning and preparedness. But one of the things that's really popped out this summer, I think, for us and bylaw enforcement were there. Kevin and Sean gave an update on homelessness and some of the issues that we saw in our community on people living in parks in our tents and this whole homelessness aspect. And there's a nurse working the streets of Dawson Creek on behalf of Northern Health with her team dealing with homeless people and people who are mental health and addictions issue, and they've done a really great job. And Damon indicated that it's probably reduced the mental health and addictions calls that the RCMP are responding to by about 10%. So that's a very good thing to see that service. So I'm going to arrange to get them to our next committee of the whole meeting and do a presentation to council so that we get a chance to meet and hear from them and see the work they're doing in our community. I thought it was very well done. Two other ones I really want to mention briefly, and Councillor Wilbur and I attended the Enbridge open house in their new office in Fort St. John, as well as the Home Hardware grand opening was on Friday. I forgot to mention that, or Thursday, and I went and cut the board to open that new store with Councillor Javetkov. It was really good to see that store open and back in business, and it's a major piece of our community when you come into Main Street. We had BC Games here and as a delegation, and so we have two pieces of requests from them. The use of the Kenborick Aquatic Center for showers and swim pass. So I'd like to bring that back to council for your consideration. Councillor.
So we grant the request.
Duncan, can we get a cost on the swim passes?
Sure. So through your worship, maybe just logistics of the showers and cost of the swim passes, and I'll pass it over to Ross.
Thank you, through your worship. The cost for 120 passes over 3 days is $2,070. Don't really have to consider a shower and a swim because it'll be one and the same with the short period of time that they have there. So.
Okay. And so we'll fund that through our grants?
Grants, and sorry, through your worship, currently we have $11,500 remaining in our grant of $12,500.
Okay, thank you. So your motion, Councillor Parslow, we grant the request and we fund it out of the grants policy. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kemp, discussion? Comments? Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And Councillor Earl brought forward a motion that we support the Legion. And that'll be
also out of this fund.
Also out of the grants. Do we have an amount?
I'm just basing it on the information I got this morning from Councillor Earl. $2,500 sounds appropriate.
So the cost breakdown I have that I forwarded to Duncan. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to repeat that.
Okay.
We've just got the estimate from Judy Kacharik, and it was $1,133.74.
Okay, that's part of it. That's the production. So that would the event center contracts out the sound, audio, visual stuff to Sound in Town. That's a quote from them. That was, I think, a 25% discount, given the nature of the events, that they're just trying to cover their costs and whatnot. In addition, the venue itself, $500 for hard costs. That's the setup and takedown of the stage and the chairs and various stuff. That just covers staff time. And then there is an insurance piece of 75 cents per head. I know she did, in the body of the email, give the Legion the option of taking out insurance on their own and naming the event center as a third party, but I don't, once again, given that they've previously got the amenities for at no cost, I don't think they budgeted for that as well. So add that in, you're looking at somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 based on an attendance of 600 to 700, which is what the Legion advised me they generally come to expect.
So a budget of $2,500, I think we have to approve.
Upwards. I would also ask that staff coordinate with the event center or the good folks at Spectra and the Legion to communicate to the public, should this pass, that we are moving the location of the event, because most people who attend annually just kind of show up in Chaga Hall. So I don't want people showing up to a closed venue and missing the service because...
But I think we want to leave that to the Legion. The Legion are the ones, it's their event and it's not ours. I don't want us to take on the accountability and responsibility of people. I'm good to help them, but I don't want to
help them is my engagement
take the responsibility
so that we
of
can help get the
people
word
getting
out.
angry at us because we didn't advertise the event. It's their event. Further discussion on the motion then. We're going to authorize a budget up to $2,500. Do I have it, was moved and seconded?
Is it second?
It's not.
Oh. Not yet? So Councillor Earl, Councillor Wilbur? I didn't think it was.
It is now.
I thought it was initially in the
Well, it was moved to come forward under Mayor's business. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you for that.
Can I?
Yep, go ahead.
So I would like to understand, for council to understand, that costs, anytime we use the facilities, such as for budget meetings, it seems that we should find another location if that's our cost. So I'd like to report on the cost of us using Mercer Hall for our various functions.
Brenda?
Through your worship, I did get that notification from TAB this morning, and the last budget consultation cost was $1,422.
Okay, thank you. So I want to...
$1,400 to use our facility.
Go ahead, Brenda.
And there was one more item.
I got the ALC letter, yeah.
You do, sir.
Yeah. So we have a suggestion, we write a letter to the Agricultural Land Commission expressing our disappointment that we weren't notified and our community wasn't appropriately engaged. Was that the intent?
Yep.
Yep. Would it be to ask for maybe they come again?
Come again, yeah.
I would think it would be appropriate if it's...
Good. So motion to do so, moved by Councillor Javetkov, second Councillor Wilbur. Discussion? All
Bold
in favor?
font. No.
Opposed? Carried. And Councillor Parslow, did you want to make a motion? I'm kind of seeking here because we're outside of... We'll bring it back. We'll bring some information back through our budget. Councillor Lexman?
Your Worship, you touched on the CN meeting. Would you like just a 2-minute update?
Sure.
Okay, so I think CN has been an issue we've taken on as a council. The whistle cessation issue. We have a number of crossings in our city. We continue down the route of doing a study that is required by the Act anyway, by 2021, I believe, by legislation. Our meeting was based on there should be a possibility of adjusting their schedules, which would probably meet most people's expectations. I don't think people mind the whistle blowing as much throughout the day or even into the evening. The concern arises when they're blowing it at 1 o'clock in the morning, 12:30, 4 a.m. in the morning. We've asked them to look at their scheduling practices to say, look, we can probably accomplish what we need. They were going to look at that and get back to us based on that. There are numerous times you'll see 3 cars being moved at 1:17 in the morning and the train whistle is going. So hopefully we can accomplish the whistle cessation without huge cost associated with it. Just some common sense, I think, can go a long way here.
Well, hopefully that'll result in some favorable changes for them. Councillor Javetkov?
I just had a question on the 8th Street Bridge, if you found anything new on
I'm
it.
sleeping, I don't.
So the bridge, so they're moving forward with the project. It'll begin construction next year. We did raise the issue of the lift station and the sewer line. They are going to bring it back to have some further review of it, and Scott Maxwell committed to us that they would do that. We also, Councillor Lexstrom raised the issue of the aesthetics of the railing and things like that. So the project will be proceeding next year, and they've committed to looking at those two items for us. And we did raise that issue of the lift station and the sewer line in terms of it being now an additional cost to the City of Dawson Creek residents and business taxpayers on those additional costs. 9.2, I'd raised the conference attendance policy that Council passed and we reaffirmed in May of this year in regards to this, but it struck me on item 2, and everybody's got a hard copy of it, that any other conferences or workshops that Council wish to attend are upon request and attended by Mayor and Council or authorized by the Mayor. And so I just am looking for some clarification from you guys, because I'm assuming that if you attend something that you're going to expense, that's why this policy exists, that the Mayor is the one that's given the role of approving or not approving it. And I just want some discussion about that, because it struck me that I don't think I've been adhering to the policy as it relates to, and I don't think some council were aware of that as well. So I raise it back up for your guys' interpretation in terms of, is that appropriate, what you anticipated it to do, and what your expectation is of how I would administer the policy on that behalf. So basically I read it to say that anybody who wants to go to a conference or workshop, they make the request to the Mayor, and the Mayor would authorize. Councillor Lexford?
It's just speaking to the policy. I think most of it is good. The top 3, I think, makes sense. I think that item puts you in a difficult spot to pick and choose which councillor can and can't attend. It catches me somewhat by surprise. So, as I think it has everybody, I think a better approach, and I'll throw this out for discussion, would be if we have X budget to attend conferences, that we divvy that up 6 ways, and if a councillor reaches that, then we will have to address it as a council. So maybe it's $2,000. This is outside of the UBCM, the NCLGA, and then your designate or yourself to the FCM. I just think that's probably somewhat more workable for council. Maybe there's better ways, but this way, I think it puts our Mayor in a difficult position to pick and choose. Yes, councillor, you can go. No, councillor, you can't go. People don't go, I think, for just, I want to go to a conference. You spend enough time doing this job, but there are different times that different councillors attend because that is their focus for the people we represent together.
Yeah, it is awkward, honestly, in terms of saying, oh, if somebody asked me, I'm saying, yeah, I'm not. But I think I just wanted clarification as well, right? Because I'm not administering that. And Councillor Parsons?
Yes, I concur with what you said about putting the Mayor in an awkward position. I don't know if I concur with the other part of it, but I'm not going to try to label anybody here, but go back into history. But I was working under the operating system that as relayed to me verbally by somebody in an esteemed position. Not you. Sort of regional meetings, such as the one I went to, the Doyle Cleaner, found it fascinating, but I went there partially because of the work you've been doing of showing the First Nations communities that we're open for business, with TLEs and all that stuff, and through interest as well. But going to like Fort St. John, Chetwynd, Pouce Coupé or whatever, yeah, we should show our face at those meetings. Now, going outside the Peace Country, I've always thought that, yeah, we put in a request to you. But I've always appreciated the practice, and I hate to say this, that Fort St. John, as I understand it, that any request to or consideration for going to out of region meetings is brought before council, and the council decides.
Yeah,
It takes the onus off the mayor. It's public. At certain times of the electoral season, I get all sorts of questions about the travel of elected officials, and apart from the mayor that gives the reports, and I've always had to share that the mayor is also the economic development person. So you've got to distinguish between economic development and representing the community at various things as well. It would be, if it's done in open, it's voted upon, it's transparent. I think there's a lot of, we should consider it.
I honestly, I know there's different councilors and councils of different municipalities have different models for that. Some have a budget, some have that reporting. I'm open, I've no issues with it at all, but when I saw this, I thought, we've got a policy and I'm not adhering to it, and I wanted to bring it back.
No, that's right.
Why don't I have some discussions with administration and bring back some of that potential options. We'll look at that and bring it back to council for some further discussion in terms of those options. The last piece to this is as information is sharing and beneficial to all, councilors attending other workshops and conferences are to provide a written or verbal report of the council meeting following the conference or workshop. And there's another one that we should be absolutely following in terms of when you talk about that transparency.
You do that.
Thank you. So we'll bring that back to council for some options. Brenda?
Just a motion to direct staff to bring back options.
Thank you. Councillor Earl? Second. Councillor Wilbur? Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. 9.3 delegation requests. And Duncan, for the life of me, I can't remember why this comes on here.
I'm not sure why that's on there either. Maybe Brenda remembers or Cindy.
Sorry, I was busy writing the motion. What was-
Delegation request 9.3.
That was, we were going to deal with delegation requests at the end of mayor's business, but you have already dealt with that.
That was
It's covered.
Oh, the BC Transit.
The requests that come from delegations.
delegation.
Any requests that come
Yeah.
will be dealt with under 9.3.
Right.
So
So now we'll do that.
See
so
it.
we don't, because I lose it. Diary,
Nothing to update, your worship.
consent calendar. Strategic priorities. Oh, so I need a motion for consent, please. Councillor Lexman, Councillor Earl, all in favor? Opposed, carried. Strategic priorities,
Nothing to update, your worship.
media.
What?
And we're going to now, a motion to recess to closed, and agenda items, items 1 are under section 92B. Agenda items 3.1, 3.2, and 4.1 are under section 91K. Agenda items 5.1 and 5.2 under section 91E. And agenda item 5.3 is amended to 91G for litigation. Motion to recess, closed. Councillor Earl, Councillor Wilbur, all in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you. And we'll have 5 minutes.